If you like the story, you can support the author on Patreon. Link is in the description.
Chapter 21, Chapter 19, Gringotts, 5. Diagon Alley, as one of the economic centres of British wizarding society, was under the watchful eye of the Auror Office. The chief Auror of the British Auror Office, Rufus Scrimgeour, was having a terrible day. First, he let a dark wizard escape, and now he had just been notified of a fight breaking out in front of Gringotts. If it were anyone else fighting, he would throw both offenders into Azkaban and toss away the key, but he couldn't do that. The offenders were the Lord Patriarch of House Black and the Lady Matriarch of House Longbottom. If he dared to arrest either of the two, perhaps on the same day, he would receive his letter of resignation. Arcturus Black was the leader of the Pureblood faction, controlling almost the entire Ministry of Magic, while Augusta Longbottom was protected by Albus Dumbledore, a powerful wizard of special grade, and one of the leaders of the Wizengamot. All of this, assuming he could even arrest the legendary Arcturus Black, a semi-special class wizard. In summary, he was caught in the middle of a fight between two giants and couldn't do anything for fear that something would happen to him or his career. Although he would like to see the legendary Arcturus Black in Azkaban for various crimes of bribery, murder, and abuse of power, unfortunately, to his dismay, he couldn't do something like that. Releasing a resigned sigh, Rufus and a group of experienced Aurors apparat directly to Diagon Alley. Upon arriving at the scene, he saw a building in front of Gringotts, adorned with enormous silver needles, each measuring at least 20 meters in length. Rufus didn't need to be a genius to know that it was the innate technique of House Longbottom. Then, he looked at the massive black skeleton with a deep gaze tinged with respect. Arcturus might be a nepotistic scoundrel in his eyes, but the chief Auror recognized the strength the man possessed. Controlling such a powerful cursed spirit showed just how strong the Black Patriarch was. Although he wasn't at the special grade level, he wasn't far off. Standing between Augusta and Arcturus, Rufus spoke, trying to calm things down. "Ladies and gentlemen, I think we should calm down to avoid causing any more unnecessary damage to Diagon Alley. It wasn't me who attacked first, Chief Auror," Arcturus responded with his deep, cold voice, looking at Augusta with a condescending gaze. Rufus couldn't help but mentally curse Matriarch Longbottom for her impulsiveness. How dare she attack someone stronger than her, knowing she wouldn't win? She was just a grade 2 witch. "He and his great-niece insulted me and my grandson," Augusta retorted, her eyes filled with fury, almost as if they were burning with furious flames. Nevertheless, she cancelled her own innate technique, causing the needles embedded in the adjacent building to disappear, or rather, shrink back to their original size. She knew she couldn't defeat the man in front of her, and the Aurors weren't on her side at the moment. How she wished she had Dumbledore with her now, to try to pressure Arcturus. Unfortunately, the most powerful man in England wasn't available at the moment. "Funny, because it was you who called my grandson a girl first. Don't be hypocritical, Augusta. That's not something someone from the White faction should do," Arcturus spoke calmly as the curtain behind him swallowed the gigantic black skeleton hundreds of meters tall. "Don't worry, Chief Auror, I won't file a complaint about this attack, but don't think you won't pay dearly at the next Wizengamot session," said Arcturus, looking at the woman who displayed an unpleasant expression on her face after hearing his words. She knew she had done something wrong in attacking a patriarch of a noble house and would be duly punished. The severity of the punishment depended on how many members would be on her house's side in the Senate at that moment. But first and foremost, they weren't many, as Dumbledore was not well regarded in the eyes of other noble houses. Augusta could see many industries and shops under the name of House Longbottom cruelly confiscated and handed on a silver platter to the odious man, not only to financially weaken the White faction but also to weaken House Longbottom, which many nobles considered traitors. Asterion watched the entire show with excitement shining in his eyes, not caring much about the political impact. Seeing an almost fight between wizards for the first time was thrilling, but he couldn't help but look at the future 33rd Minister of Magic, Rufus Scrimgeour. A foolish man who tried to convey a sense of security while a war was being waged in the corridors of the ministry. A stupid decision that led the man to die at the hands of Voldemort in the future, who sought the whereabouts of Harry Potter. When Rufus refused to reveal where the boy was, the Dark Lord casually killed him. Poor man. Arcturus didn't bother to give another glance at Augusta and Neville and walked toward Gringotts under the fearful and respectful eyes of the goblins who had witnessed the entire scene earlier. Leaving Rufus and Augusta with somber looks, one was concerned about getting too involved in Wizengamot politics, while the other was cautious about what House Longbottom would have to pay at the next Senate meeting. Entering Gringotts, Arcturus looked at his great-grandson and asked, "What did you think of all this?" "You provoked her to the limit," Asterion replied. That was the conclusion of the events earlier. From the beginning, Arcturus had subtly provoked the old lady without her even realizing it. Exactly. With her attack, we gained many properties and shops in Diagon Alley from House Longbottom. And the best part is, even if Dumbledore tries to stop us, we have a very valid and concrete reason. We weakened 2 enemies with just 1 attack, Arcturus said, nodding in satisfaction at Asterion's response. He continued, "So, remember this scene well, Asterion. You must control your emotions, or they will be used against you, just as I used hers against herself." Asterion nodded, but he felt he didn't need that warning. He didn't like expressing his feelings much in the first place, often preferring to keep everything to himself. Chapter 22, Chapter 20, Unrest in England. As Asterion approached the counter of the bank, where a rather ugly-looking goblin was working, his heart beat faster. He glanced briefly at his great-grandfather and almost smiled, thinking of Arcturus Black's shocked and incredulous face. He also looked at the famous warning from Gringotts written on the wall of the place, but he didn't pay much attention to it. It was just a poor chained dragon. He had a much better dragon himself. As for the waiting line, well, let's say that maybe because of the small show outside of Gringotts, people let him and his family pass without much fuss. Arriving at the service counter, Asterion particularly disliked having to look up. The goblins intentionally raised the height of the counters, probably to feel superior to wizards and to irritate them more easily. And to tell the truth, they really managed to annoy him, even without saying absolutely anything up to that moment. Even with their arrival, the goblin continued to write with a quill on a parchment that looked new, as if he hadn't noticed them. The goblin itself was small, not measuring more than 50 centimeters, with sparse grey hair, a huge pointed nose, and large, sharp ears at the top. Definitely an appearance worthy of a horror movie. "Disgusting creatures," Asterion heard Narcissa mutter beside him. He completely agreed with her assessment. Goblins were ugly, arrogant, and quite unpleasant to have a conversation with, regardless of who you were. Looking coldly at the goblin who continued to write, indifferent to what was happening around him, Asterion unleashed Baskerville's unscrupulous malice completely. A monstrous and chilling laughter echoed in the entrance hall of Gringotts. Everyone felt as if they were inside a frozen cave. The cold, murderous intent sent shivers down the spines of every person and goblin in the hall. "It seems you've noticed our arrival, Mr. Goblin," said Asterion, looking at the goblin who stared back at him with a touch of fear. His eyes reflected nothing but a gaze completely devoid of emotions, as if he were looking at someone dead. "I was distracted," said the goblin, showing a wide and somewhat terrifying smile. His gaze fell upon Asterion's shadow with a touch of caution. "But I must inform you that pets are not allowed in Gringotts." Upon hearing this, Asterion gave an innocent look while gesturing for the goblin to proceed. "You can try to remove Baskerville from the premises, I won't stop you." The goblin glanced at the gigantic dog with hundreds of pairs of red eyes and chose to remain silent. As for the rules of Gringotts, if a superior were to inquire, he would claim he was old and had forgotten some. It was foolish to fight against a curse of semi-special level, at least he wouldn't survive for even a second. Seeing that the goblin ignored Baskerville, Asterion nodded and looked at his great-grandfather, signaling for him to take over the conversation. A private room with the goblin in charge of Vault 666 of the House of Black, Arcturus spoke, looking directly into the goblin's eyes, causing him to swallow hard and promptly summon the goblin in question. "Seriously, Vault 666. Upon hearing the vault number, Asterion pursed his lips and looked skeptically at the old patriarch. In the face of his great-grandson's gaze, Arcturus only responded somewhat helplessly. The Third Lord was a true occultist, he even started a cult. It was he who transferred the wealth of the House of Black to Gringotts, although only a part of it. Asterion rolled his eyes at the dark past of his ancestor. At the same time, he remembered the cursed spirits of the third bearer of the Black family's curse technique. They were all mentioned in the book. Most of them had names of dukes, princes, and infernal kings, even names of angels. Perhaps that's why his family was targeted by the church in the early 13th century. "A man's dreams are sacred," Narcissa laughed at their conversation. "Please, I have no dreams concerning any deity, whether sacred or demonic," Asterion replied, rolling his eyes again. "If God and Lucifer existed and knew of our family's plan, we would definitely be dead." Setting aside those thoughts, Asterion focused on the magical energy coursing through his body. There was a considerable amount, only a little more was needed for him to be considered promoted. This tiny amount of energy separated him from a nearly semi-special class wizard. Perhaps when I turn 10 or 11, Asterion thought. He was eager for the day when he would advance to a semi-special class wizard. A semi-special wizard at the age of 10 or 11, that alone would be enough for him to be recorded in the annals of wizarding history as one of the greatest prodigies of his time. This was not a world of cultivation where you could infinitely grow stronger by absorbing energy. In this cruel and unfair world, your talent determined how high you would rise and the speed at which you would reach your peak. Some would reach adulthood with power at grade 3 or even grade 4, never able to progress to the next level. Others, like Asterion, were already reaching the pinnacle of the world before even reaching adulthood. This world was truly unfair to those without talent. Ladies and gentlemen, please follow me to the private room, Asterion snapped out of his reverie, hearing another goblin, dressed in simpler clothes, who guided him to a room where another goblin awaited. This goblin was different from the previous ones, he wore more flamboyant and elegant attire, though in dark shades. He sported a large silver necklace around his neck, with a jewel containing a strange coat of arms depicting trees and flowers. Asterion presumed him to be a noble of the goblin race, which was not surprising given that they were governed by an absolutist monarchy. The goblin walked awkwardly with his short legs up to Asterion, holding an ancient-looking white marble bowl and an intricately carved knife with extremely complicated ancient runes. 7 drops of your blood, no more, no less, the goblin spoke with his hoarse and repulsive voice, as if he had swallowed glass. Before undergoing the test, Asterion glanced at Arcturus to see if anything was amiss. Seeing the man nodding at him, confirming that it was safe, the boy didn't hesitate to cut his palm with the knife, carefully squeezing out 7 drops of his blood. The goblin took the bowl with the 7 drops of blood and performed a spell using the bowl itself, which glowed in a golden hue, revealing thousands of runes that seemed to move on their own. Upon finishing the spell, the goblin poured all 7 drops onto the ancient-looking parchment. The parchment, which had been blank, began to write itself, revealing Asterion's true lineage. Asterion Regulus Black Slytherin. Blood purity, 100%, 7 generations of pure-blooded wizards in both paternal and maternal lines. Parents, Regulus Black, father, Minerva Slytherin, mother. Possible inheritance, the oldest and noblest house of Black. Possible inheritance, the oldest and most noble house of Slytherin. The goblin looked at what was written on the paper and rubbed his eyes in confusion, thinking he had read it wrong. He read it again only to see the same hallucination. Surely, a surprise, Lord Black, said the goblin after letting out a shrill and eerie laugh. He then handed the paper to the confused patriarch of the House of Black. Though puzzled by the goblin's strange behavior, Arcturus lowered his head and began to read the content. The more he read the parchment's content, the wider his eyes bulged in total disbelief and incredulity. Chapter 23, Chapter 21, Unrest in England, 2. Arcturus took a deep breath and sought to calm himself, though his heart was still in turmoil. The direct blood of Salazar Slytherin still flowed in the land, nothing less than in his great-grandson. How Regulus had become involved with someone from the direct lineage of the Slytherin house was a puzzle that troubled him. A series of unanswered questions churned in his mind, making it difficult for Arcturus to think clearly. He had already met another family descended from the Slytherin house, the Gaunts. However, they were merely an impoverished household, filled with an innate arrogance that did not match the legendary legacy they carried. But this situation was different. Asterion's mother, Minerva, bore the Slytherin name, which meant she was recognized as an heir or, at the very least, was registered in the Slytherin house's family tree. Looking at the boy who gazed at him innocently, Arcturus coldly huffed. He knew the boy had orchestrated this entire scene as revenge, the boy certainly held his grudges. He just didn't expect such a surprising retaliation. The Slytherin house held a singular significance for this nation, especially due to Salazar, a brilliant man who left a remarkable legacy throughout Britain. He was the architect of the foundations for the future Ministry of Magic, shaping and innovating in British wizarding society. Although thousands of years had passed since his death, the rules and principles he established still permeated the nation. The noble houses that once knelt before the man now controlled wizarding society. It was only after the disappearance of the Slytherin house that the Black House ascended to the position of leader of the Pureblood faction. For this reason, the Slytherin house always held deep meaning for the noble houses. This was one of the reasons why the noble houses chose to ally with Voldemort in the war. Narcissa looked surprised at her great uncle's constantly changing expressions. She swore she had never seen Arcturus Black as emotional as he appeared at that moment. The stunning woman approached Arcturus and looked at the parchment in his hand with a curious gaze. Upon seeing the contents of the parchment, Narcissa took a deep breath and looked at Asterion with a shocked expression. Asterion, who had witnessed the entire scene, couldn't help but feel extremely pleased seeing the constant changes in the man's face. Revenge certainly tasted like glorious triumph. Ragmuck, I would appreciate it if you kept discretion regarding what you read on the parchment, he said before the goblin could respond. I'm not asking you to keep it a secret forever, just wait a month before you start selling the information to the other noble houses. Arcturus knew it was impossible to keep such information due to the greedy nature of goblins, but he also didn't care. He just wanted to buy time to prepare to present Asterion in the most dazzling way possible because from today onwards, the House of Black officially carried the name Slytherin. At the same time, a daring idea crossed his mind. With both statuses, the fear of the House of Black would be diluted with the name Slytherin. This meant that the restraints holding back the development of the House of Black had been undone. We have to go, there's a lot of paperwork to prepare everything, as well as formalizing your inheritance in both noble houses, Arcturus said, not caring about his great-grandson's childish revenge. He was racing against time. Narcissa took Asterion's hand, and the three of them left the room, leaving a pensive goblin behind. Dumbledore must pay dearly for this information, as well as other noble houses. I feel like I'm getting rich, murmured the goblin, his smile stretching from one side of his face to the other. Could have told me such important information earlier, don't you think, my dear great-grandson, Arcturus whispered to Asterion after they exited Gringotts. Though maintaining his elegance, they all walked with slightly quicker steps than usual. How Arcturus wished he had known this information earlier, but there was no remedy for regret in the world. Well, it wouldn't be a surprise then, my dear great-grandfather, Asterion replied with a small, adorable smile on his innocent face. A smile that Narcissa would put into an animated photo to cherish every possible moment. Just because it was operated abruptly, you withheld such important information, don't you think it's an exaggeration? Arcturus grunted slightly coldly and spoke with a slightly helpless tone. Well, it's one of my charms, am I too dramatic? Asterion didn't mind and showed a rather carefree smile. Looking at the boy playing the role of an innocent child, Arcturus rolled his eyes and just muttered under his breath, cheeky brat. Asterion smiled and placed his hand on one of Arcturus's arms, while Narcissa did the same on the other side. In the next instant, the three of them disappeared in Diagon Alley. Unfortunately for Arcturus, the news of Asterion's lineage was sold the next day. Something the old patriarch would remember well, as he had promised to make Ragmuck pay dearly for selling the information so quickly. The worst part was who he sold the information to. Looking at the cover of the Daily Prophet containing the image of him, Narcissa, and Asterion, Arcturus clenched his teeth in frustration. It was a conspiracy. A mere sensationalist journalist would never have enough money to buy such information from a greedy goblin. Whoever bought the information passed it to Rita Skeeter to cause chaos. He could imagine how chaotic the next session of the Wizengamot would be. Good move, Albus, Arcturus muttered with a cold look in his eyes. Very well. Let the games begin. I want to see if you can handle the pressure, and I'll start with you, you mere fifth-rate journalist. How dare you ruin my plans, Arcturus said coldly as he threw the newspaper onto the table. He was certain it was Albus Dumbledore who leaked the news, which was obvious, as the biggest suspect is often the one who benefits the most from the news. And for that man, a divided Pureblood faction was a good thing. As for the reason for the division, it was quite simple, interests involved. Everyone wanted to profit from Asterion, especially with his great-grandson being unmarried. It was a stroke of genius by Dumbledore, not only delaying his fight against the Longbottom House but also sowing chaos in the Pureblood faction. It seems Arcturus will be busy for a while, Narcissa murmured, looking at the boy in her lap, reading the most important book in the library, although for her, the pages of the book were blank. It was rare for the Black Patriarch to skip meals, as he had done all day today, coming in and out of the Black Manor. A challenge at his age can spice up his monotonous life, Asterion said, without taking his eyes off the book. However, his eyes sparkled with a touch of wisdom, although he seemed indifferent to politics, he wasn't totally indifferent to her. He knew that with the exposure of his maternal lineage, the masquerade ball next month would be very lively. Chapter 24, Chapter 22, Unrest in England, 3. England, City of York, Greengrass Manor. The rise of a new Dark Lord. I must admit, the journalist has the gift of creating impactful headlines, Aurelius Greengrass, patriarch of the Greengrass family, said in a sarcastic tone. As he took a sip of tea, Helena added with a tone of veiled curiosity, I am genuinely intrigued to see how she will handle Arcturus Black's imminent wrath. Aurelius nodded. Arcturus Black was a vengeful man and showed no mercy to his enemies. If Rita Skeeter survived more than a week, the Greengrass patriarch would genuinely be surprised. He looked at his wife and asked, What do you think of the boy? With a subtle smile playing on her lips, Helena examined the image of the boy in the newspaper. From his cold and indifferent expression, he is unquestionably a Black, from the tips of his hair to the depths of his soul, although it is impossible to deny that its appearance can deceive the unsuspecting. A true Black. Aurelius murmured, recalling his days at Hogwarts. He remembered seeing the members of the Black family, all of whom, except Sirius, Andromeda, and Bellatrix, were so cold that it was difficult to approach them, although equally powerful. So, which of our daughters do you intend to betroth him to? Seeing her husband's pensive expression, Helena, who had been married to the man for over 20 years, knew what her husband was thinking at that moment. It wasn't very difficult to guess. Am I that easy to read? Aurelius raised one of his eyebrows, intrigued. My dear, you should practice more on hiding your emotions. Helena shrugged, responding without much concern for the unpleasant expression on her husband's face. She continued speaking. But I don't think it will be so easy to win the boy over. The other houses will fight tooth and nail to win the right to be the boy's wife. Aurelius nodded, aware that this competition for the alliance of the Black Heir would be more than a mere battle of wills, but a true war of interests and ambitions. For the young man possessed not only the legacies of the most powerful wizards on the planet but also the potential to become one of the most powerful wizards of his generation, a key player of enormous importance in the British and international wizarding society. If you want to win the boy over, you must be prepared to bleed, for Arcturus, that old fox, will not sell his grandson for anything less than a fortune, although I would do the same in his place. Helena laughed at her husband's expression and spoke, looking out at the mansion garden. The Greengrass patriarch remained silent, pondering how much he was willing to spend to secure this marriage. In a cozy first-floor house, a girl around 19 years old opened the door and shouted loudly, Mom, I'm back from the mission. Seeing no response, the girl's hair changed color from purple to matte gray. She quickly ascended the stairs to the first floor, leading to a hallway with 3 doors, 2 bedrooms, and a bathroom. Opening the door to her parents' room, she sighed with relief upon seeing her mother lying comfortably in bed, reading a newspaper. However, her mother's face displayed a clear expression of nostalgia and a fleeting trace of guilt. Is something wrong, Mom? The young woman asked as she sat down beside her mother on the bed. The woman in bed looked surprised at her daughter's sudden arrival and said with a welcoming smile on her lips, Nymphadora, I didn't realize you had arrived, sweetie. Mom, don't call me Nymphadora. Tonks groaned in frustration, hearing her mother use her full name. Yes, Tonks, Andromeda responded absent-mindedly, returning her focus to the newspaper. What are you looking at that's so interesting you didn't notice I arrived? Tonks asked, looking curiously at the newspaper. To her surprise, she saw 3 people, an elderly, very tall man, a beautiful woman equally tall, holding the shoulders of an adorable boy. The 3 were obviously nobles by the clothes they wore and how they carried themselves. She had encountered her fair share of nobility at Hogwarts, and many times, those encounters hadn't ended pleasantly, so the young woman didn't have a favorable impression of any noble. Although, strangely, none had ever caused trouble for her, which was odd given how arrogant those annoying young masters were. But the headline was even more intriguing than the people in the photo. The Rise of a New Dark Lord. The headline certainly captured her curiosity. Who are they, and why does the old man seem familiar to me? Have I met him before? Tonks asked, looking at the 3 people in the moving photo. She focused on the elderly man. For some reason, she felt she knew him, but couldn't quite recall when she had met him. Perhaps she was too young at the time? Andromeda opened her mouth to speak but then closed it again, hesitating to divulge who they were. She didn't want her daughter to get involved in this political world, but seeing her daughter's curiosity, she knew she couldn't remain silent. He's your great-great-uncle, Arcturus. Beside him is my sister, Narcissa, and as for the boy, he's the son of my cousin, Regulus, Andromeda answered after hesitating for a long moment. Tonks was simply petrified by the news. Her mother had never spoken about her family of origin. Tonks only knew that her mother had been disowned for marrying her father, so she had never cared to ask about such a despicable family. So why are you showing such a sad expression then? They are horrible people, they kicked you out of the house. Tonks frowned, seeing the melancholic expression on her mother's face. Andromeda stroked the photo and sighed. You don't understand, Dora. I miss them, my sister, Arcturus. I even want to meet my new cousin, he looks adorable in the photo. I always wanted a younger brother. Why miss people who cruelly expelled you for marrying someone you loved? Tonks really didn't understand her mother. Feeling missing for such people was incomprehensible to her. They aren't like that, Dora, they love me, just as I love them. Even from afar, they protected me, just as they protected you. Andromeda shook her head as she weakly leaned against the pillow. But they expelled you, Tonks said, eyes wide. Was it because of her mother's family that those irritating young masters never bothered her? It was the rules, Dora. I chose not to practice the family's simplified innate technique, so by the family's rules, I was no longer a black, Andromeda said, staring up at the ceiling. Sometimes she wondered if it was the right choice, but after meeting Ted and feeling the love he had for her, she still thanked herself for the decision she made decades ago. Seeing the melancholy on Andromeda's face, Tonks didn't press further with questions, though she was shocked to learn that her mother was a member of the infamous Black family. But Tonks was determined to help her mother reconcile with her family. She could see how much Andromeda missed them. Chapter 25, Chapter 23, Escaping from Azkaban. Located in the North Sea, the stony island seemed like a world apart from the real world. At the island's center, Azkaban rose high in the sky amidst the tumultuous, icy waves of the sea, resembling a monolithic, bleak, and lifeless structure. With its origins shrouded in mystery, the first known inhabitant was a cruel dark wizard named Accusations, who would lure nearby Muggle sailors and use them as guinea pigs for his macabre experiments. His magical experiments were so wicked and cruel that they attracted a large number of malevolent spectral creatures called Dementors, a quantity so great that it could threaten the mainland if allowed to roam free. Therefore, in the year 1718, the new British Minister of Magic, Damocles Roll, insisted on using Azkaban as a prison. Instead of using people to guard the prisoners, he chose dreadful Dementors as guards, making Azkaban later known as the cruelest prison on the planet. Inside one of the cells of Azkaban, if a luxurious room could be called a cell, a beautiful woman around 30 years old twirled her body around cheerfully, looking at a photo in the newspaper with an extremely excited expression. He's so cute. I want to lock him up in my basement and feed him forever. No, 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 I can't. He's my cousin. Stop talking in my head, you crazy bitches. But he's so cute. The woman spoke as she hugged the newspaper against her chest with a dreamy expression, a sadistic smile tracing on her full lips. I'm getting out of this poor room and going back to my wealthy family. The magic I've gathered over the years should be enough. She looked at the door separating her and her freedom, smiling maliciously. Banging on the reinforced magical iron door, causing a loud noise, she continued to pound, one after another. After 10 minutes of this, a cold and desolate atmosphere fell upon her. She had finally caught the attention of the prison guards. Looking at the Dementor that appeared in front of the door, the woman cheerfully greeted the spectral being. Little ball of happiness, my dear friend. Seeing that the Dementor hadn't responded, the woman pouted very upset and muttered to herself, doesn't remember the long hours we spent together? I painted your nails, ungrateful bitch. Seeing that she still hadn't received a response, the woman stopped talking. She reached her hand through the bars of the door's window and touched the Dementor. She used the small portion of magical energy she could muster at the moment. Instantly, a sphere of blue light fell upon the Dementor, gradually melting it into a blue orb in the woman's hand. Hee hee, I bet I'm the first one to swallow a Dementor. The woman chuckled amusingly and swallowed the blue orb, without caring about the unbearable taste. The woman waved her hand, and a curtain of darkness appeared outside the cell, from which a Dementor emerged. Ark must be proud when he sees my incredible abilities, she said, showing a proud look as she looked at the Dementor. Now, open the door for me, lovely sweetie. The Dementor directly dispelled the enchantment guarding the door, which opened with a gentle touch from the woman, who stepped out of the cell in her long black Victorian dress. Ah, the sweet smell of mold and despair! The woman opened her arms and deeply breathed in the putrid air of Azkaban. With a few excited hops, the woman walked down the long corridor, humming and lazily swinging her arms. Where is Sirius Black? Sirius Black! Oh, Sirius Black, where can I find you? After passing through many corridors and empty cells, she halted her steps, feeling the familiar presence, and grinned maliciously as she looked at the numbered door, XY390. Approaching the iron door, she stood on tiptoes and peered into the cell. Found Sirius Black. You look dead, pup, she said, looking at the dirty, disheveled, and skeletal man slumped weakly against the wall covered in scribbles of a madman. The man's eyes opened, revealing brown eyes, almost entirely black. He looked at the green-eyed woman at the door and parted his parched lips to speak hoarsely. Bella. You got it. It's me, the amazing and wonderful witch, Bellatrix. Bella opened a wide smile, showing her teeth as she gestured with her fingers. Sirius couldn't help but smile. You're still the same, Bella. Obviously, who else would I be if not me, Bella said, feeling pleased with his words. Bella had the Dementor open the door and asked, hands on her hips, are you coming with me? Yes, I still have to kill a certain rat. A cold and chilling look reflected in the eyes of the man unjustly accused. Tomu, she looked satisfied at Sirius, as if she was seeing a good student finally following the right path. Killing is always the most relaxing way to unwind, I agree with you, pup. Sirius couldn't help but curl his lips hearing that. When did he ever say killing was relaxing? His cousin was still equally mad, even after a decade in Azkaban, this infernal place hadn't changed her at all. Rising from the dirty and filthy floor, Sirius walked over to Bellatrix with somewhat unsteady steps. Looking at his own worn and dirty clothes, then glancing at the dazzling dress on Bellatrix's body, Sirius couldn't help but notice how cruel his grandfather was to his own grandson. He seemed more like a loving grandfather to Cygnus and Ruella's daughters than to his own grandchildren. You look like you've had a stay in a 5-star hotel, not in this damned prison, Sirius said, with a bitter and helpless tone in his voice. Well, when you have a powerful great-uncle, that happens to you, Bellatrix said, unconcerned that she was speaking to the man's grandson. That made Sirius grit his teeth in frustration. Taking a deep breath, he forced himself to calm down, otherwise, he would probably jump from the highest part of this prison over how biased his grandfather's partiality was with the sisters, Narcissa, Andromeda, and Bellatrix. Shaking his head, Sirius looked at Bellatrix and asked, what are we going to do now? Well, putting her finger to her lips, Bella showed a pensive expression before saying, I'm torn between killing everyone in this place or simply strangling my husband to death. Ignoring the part about killing everyone, why do you want to kill your husband? Sirius asked, showing genuine doubt in his voice. Bellatrix looked at Sirius as if she were seeing an idiot and spoke proudly. Does a wife need a reason to kill her husband? You're strange, pup. No, I'm not strange, you're the crazy one among us, Sirius thought as he rolled his eyes. Although he thought so, Sirius still followed Bellatrix. After all, a good Death Eater was a dead Death Eater. Chapter 24, Escaping from Azkaban, 2. Pup, did you know that you're now an uncle? Looking at the woman in a long Victorian-style black dress, coincidentally his cousin, Sirius shook his head and followed her while listening to her humming. But her words shocked him deeply, so much so that he stopped walking and looked incredulously at Bellatrix. Are you serious, Bella? Sirius asked incredulously, the image of his brother reappearing in his mind. The memory of his brother's sarcastic and arrogant laugh when the two of them went out drinking together at a Muggle bar brought up mixed feelings of happiness, sadness, and a profound sense of longing. Bellatrix didn't respond and walked, looking curiously at the metal doors, pondering what kind of agonizing torture the detainees endured at the spectral hands of the joy balls called Dementors. Without looking back, Bellatrix casually replied to Sirius. Of course I'm serious, pup. The boy's name is Asterion, and he's being raised by your grandfather and Sissy. Sirius felt his head spinning. His brother had a child, which made him both happy and regretful at the same time. Happy that his brother's memory lived on through his nephew and regretful for not being there for the child. I'm a failure as an uncle and godfather, I failed James and Lily, I even failed Regulus. Sirius murmured to himself, deeply regretting his actions since that infernal day. Anger was a dangerous feeling that made people do the most unthinkable things in moments of uncertainty. He let anger and hatred consume him, he only thought about killing and revenge. Instead of worrying about Rose's safety, he only cared about avenging James and Lily. While Sirius was consumed by guilt behind her, Bellatrix finally found her husband's cell. Once again, she used the Dementor to dispel the enchantment holding the massive iron doors. Opening the door with a big smile on her face, she looked at the thin, skeletal man leaning against the wall, a scene reminiscent of when she found Sirius earlier. "Husband, I'm back." Bellatrix entered the cell with a deadly sadistic smile on her beautiful full lips. The man opened his eyes and looked coldly at the woman. His cold gaze only made Bellatrix's smile grow wider. Opening her arms, she spun her body happily and spoke with a cute, fascinated voice, "We meet again at last, a romantic reunion scene full of feelings of hatred and resentment. Are you happy to see me, dear husband?" She looked at Rodolphus Lestrange expectantly, eagerly awaiting his words. "What are you doing here, crazy bitch?" Rodolphus pronounced coldly. There was not a hint of love in his eyes for his wife, instead, there was hatred, resentment, and madness. He deeply loathed the woman in front of him, so much so that he wanted to tear her flesh and drink her blood. What she did to him? How cruel, husband! I'm your wife, how can you speak to me like this? Bellatrix hugged herself as she recoiled, showing an expression of hurt and pain, like a maiden wounded by the man she loved. Sirius, who had composed himself, looked at the scene with surprise. He didn't know what Bella had done to make her own husband hate her so much. But knowing the Bellatrix he knew, it was probably something very cruel and sadistic. "Wife? With a wife like you, I don't even need enemies," Rodolphus mocked, his gaze incredibly cold and deadly. "Omu," Bella nodded, satisfied with her response, and spoke. "That's right, a certain wise man once said that marriage was like a war, whoever surrendered completely to the other lost their own life." Sirius looked strangely at Bella. He was sure that wasn't the intended meaning of that phrase, but since it was Bella, he didn't dwell on it much. After all, how can you try to understand the mind of a madwoman? Looking at his wife's happy face, Rodolphus scoffed. After a brief silence, he asked. "Tell me, Bellatrix, why did you marry me?" Sirius and Rodolphus looked at the woman, awaiting her response. A tense and heavy atmosphere hung in the air. Putting her finger to her lips, Bellatrix showed a pensive expression. Then, as if remembering the reason she got married, her face lit up. "I liked how my name sounded with your last name, Bellatrix Lestrange, it suits me very well," she said, her smile innocent and happy. Rodolphus pursed his lips at the absurd answer he had just heard. Sirius couldn't help but look at the man with pity. The patriarch of the House of Lestrange took a deep breath and closed his eyes. If he could, he would kill Bellatrix, but he couldn't, not in the state he was in at the moment, without his wand and his magical energy depleted. "It's better to kill me, Bellatrix, because if I escape this infernal place, I will hunt you down like an animal. I will avenge him, no matter the cost, even if I have to sell my soul, you will die saying his name." Opening his eyes, Rodolphus spoke with a tone so cold it seemed to freeze the atmosphere around him. He knew it was an imprudent response, as he could die at any moment, but he didn't care. He was so angry that he needed to speak to vent, otherwise, he swore he would kill himself. Sirius felt a shiver run down his spine as he looked at those eyes filled with hatred and madness. He couldn't imagine what Bella had done to make the man hate her like that. Bellatrix's deep green eyes practically gleamed upon hearing her husband's words. "Very well, I've changed my mind. I won't kill you right now, let's get a divorce," she said, causing Sirius and Rodolphus to widen their eyes in shock. "Our divorce boils down to one thing, whoever kills the other first wins." Bellatrix showed an expression of such excitement that she felt something trickle down her legs, she had orgasmed. The idea of such a pleasant and exciting divorce ceremony had made her climax. Seeing Bella's ecstatic face, Sirius simply backed away a meter from her, afraid that the madness could be contagious. "You'll regret this, I'll gut you like an animal, Bellatrix Black." Rodolphus's face was contorted in a tangle of anger and resentment. The divorce, besides being humiliating for a pureblood, made him feel humiliated by Bellatrix considering him weak. La 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 la. Bellatrix simply laughed adorably as she walked out of the cell, obviously leaving the door open. "Are you sure? He will surely seek revenge?" Sirius asked, walking alongside her. "Don't worry, pup, he's weak, and the weak will always be weak. That's the cruelest curse of this world," Bellatrix replied, showing a sadistic and cruel expression. "Now let's go back home." In the next instant, that expression vanished, replaced by an innocent and lively one. Sirius was speechless to describe his cousin's rapid change of expression. It seemed like she had become even crazier while being imprisoned for almost a decade. Originally, he wanted to ask her what she had done to make her own husband hate her so much, but he remained silent. He just wanted to sleep without having nightmares. Not that he hadn't also gone a little crazy during this time, this damn place could work wonders on someone's mind. Chapter 25, Wizengamot. At night in the Black Manor. Sitting in the dining hall, Arcturus, Asterion, and Narcissa dined in silence, a rather traditional dinner lavishly laid out on the oak dining table. Arcturus, as always, dressed in his elegant suit, Asterion wore an outfit similar to Seal Fantôme Ives, but in black and green tones, while Narcissa wore a delicate black dress covering her body, revealing her bare back. "Will I go to Hogwarts when I turn 11? Cutting a piece of steak with his knife, Asterion stabbed the fork into the succulent meat, but before swallowing, he asked curiously. He was quite curious about Hogwarts, after all, it was Hogwarts, and he also wanted to know the differences of Hogwarts in this reality. Arcturus paused his utensils and looked at his great-grandson with confusion. He placed the utensils on the table and asked, "When did I say you would go to Hogwarts when you turned 11? This time it was Asterion's turn to be confused. "Isn't it at 11 years old that a wizard starts their studies?" "No, the age to start at Hogwarts is from 13 onwards, Arcturus replied, surprising Asterion. Seeing his great-grandson's confusion, Arcturus began to explain, "I don't know why you think you would go to Hogwarts at 11, but it's not like that. Wizards are essentially soldiers, it's completely illogical to send children to Hogwarts at that age." Seeing the confusion growing stronger on his Asterion face, Arcturus realized that his great-grandson didn't understand the nature of Hogwarts. Hogwarts isn't just a school, it also serves as a headquarters for training young wizards in the fight against cursed spirits and dark wizards. Hogwarts is divided into two classes, the main class and the auxiliary class. The main class mostly consists of fighters, while the auxiliary class, as the name suggests, consists of auxiliary wizards who help in any way they can with their powers, whether it's healing, tracking, reconnaissance, or cleanup. Taking a breath to regain his composure, he continued, "From the first to the third year, students only need to establish a solid knowledge base for their future. Starting from the fourth year, or when they turn 16, Hogwarts begins to send students on grade 4 missions so they can gain experience. Thus, from the 4th, 5th, 6th, and 7th years, students put everything they've learned in class into practice. When they graduate from the 7th year, at 20 years old, you'll have an experienced soldier with a formed mindset." The words silenced Asterion. He understood his great-grandfather's words. Unlike the magical school in another reality, this Hogwarts wasn't an amusement park but a place where you grew stronger to survive in the future. The wizards in both realities were fundamentally different. This world needed constant soldiers to fight cursed spirits and dark wizards, otherwise, society wouldn't be what it was today. At the same time, this world had a much better fate than the world of JJK, the number of wizards in this world was much higher, resulting in fewer deaths than depicted in the anime and manga. Arcturus continued speaking after taking a sip of water from his glass. "If we were to send children to Hogwarts at 11, the Muggle government would definitely fight us to the death. For this reason, it was decided that the basic age to enroll in Hogwarts would be 13, and missions would only begin at 16. To ensure the primary safety of the children, various strict regulations were created, and both sides retreated, with the Muggle government assisting in missions by sending responsible agents along with their technology. To increase the survival rate of the students, a team of 3 people is formed at the beginning of the school year, and the Ministry also sends an experienced Auror to assist in the missions," Arcturus concluded. Asterion couldn't help but feel amazed. The mutual assistance between both worlds was something he certainly didn't expect, but upon reflection, it was quite reasonable for it to happen. After all, war wasn't an intelligent option. Not only would it reveal the existence of the supernatural, but it would also drag the entire country into conflict. Add special class wizards to the mix, and you have pandemonium on Earth. Both worlds needed each other to survive. Normal people couldn't see cursed spirits and therefore couldn't kill them, while wizards needed fresh blood constantly being sent to Hogwarts to supply the scarce workforce. In the end, both worlds reached a consensus where everyone would benefit. But upon hearing about the team and the experienced Auror, Asterion felt like he had seen this somewhere before. Then, he remembered the anime Naruto that he watched in his past life, where there was a similar system. "I just hope there won't be a Sakura on his team. If there is, I hope it's the post-time skip Sakura," he thought. "The team chosen at the beginning of the school year, do we get to choose who we go on missions with?" Asterion asked, cautious about the response he would receive. No. The Hogwarts School Council selects team members based on each individual's weaknesses. This forms a cohesive team that complements each other, as nobody is perfect. Looking at his grandson's worried face, Arcturus knew what he was concerned about and reassured him, addressing his doubts. Just as Arcturus was about to continue explaining other things, the house elf, Kriakar, apparat next to the Patriarch's chair and bowed while extending his hands, showing a letter bearing the emblem of the British Ministry of Magic. "Noble Lord Black," Kriakar intercepted a letter attempting to enter the mansion's domain, said the old house elf as he prostrated himself on the ground. Arcturus recognized the emblem and the letter, which was used to summon someone. Taking the letter in his hand, he let it float in the air. Magically, the letter seemed to come to life and began to speak with a deep, serious voice resonating throughout the dining hall. "London Grindelwald Place, number 12. This is an emergency order sent to the recipient, the Lord Patriarch of the most ancient and noble house of Black Arcturus Black 3. Arcturus Black 3, you are hereby summoned to present yourself as soon as possible before the Supreme Parliament, the Wizengamot. Refusal to comply with this summons will bring serious consequences to the recipient Arcturus Black 3. When the letter finished speaking, it turned into ashes, disappearing completely. Everyone in the dining hall fell silent, still stunned by what had just happened. Arcturus furrowed his brows deeply. He didn't appreciate the tone used in the letter. It was written as if he were a criminal being forced to appear before the Wizengamot. Obviously, this wasn't written by the Pureblood faction. The old patriarch coldly snorted. He wanted to see what tricks Dumbledore wanted to use against him. However, even though he had been summoned, he calmly resumed eating and sipped his wine, seeming unconcerned about being urgently called. Only when he finished his dinner did he leave the dining hall, holding his cane with a cold expression. Asterion observed Arcturus leaving the dining hall after receiving an urgent letter from the Ministry of Magic, specifically being summoned before the entire Wizengamot. Narcissa and Asterion exchanged confused glances. Going to the ministry and being summoned were two completely different things. Something truly serious had happened. Chapter 26, Wizengamot, 2. London British Ministry of Magic. Entering the elevator disguised as a telephone booth, Arcturus, dressed in an elegant black suit with the Black family crest in red, wore a cold and indifferent expression as the elevator descended underground, going down to the 8th level, the atrium. After almost 30 seconds, the elevator doors opened, revealing a cavern richly adorned in black marble. Stone arches decorated the environment, and numerous lights illuminated the space. The place was bustling, to say the least, with hurried people coming and going, while planes of papers flew over their heads, fleeting shadows in the chaos. Arcturus noticed that the ministry was more bustling than usual as whispers reached his ears from the background. "Did you hear? They say it was almost completely destroyed and all the prisoners escaped. They claim it was the Witch of Insanity, Bellatrix Lestrange, who initiated the entire breakout." His face took on a grim expression upon hearing this, finally understanding everything. However, what disturbed him even more was not his great niece's escape, but the fact that he hadn't received any message warning him of the mass breakout from Azkaban. He pondered the two possibilities that lay before him. Had the purebloods betrayed him, or was the first person to notice the escape on Albus Dumbledore's side? With unanswered questions echoing in his mind, Arcturus circled the imposing magical fountains, ignoring the looks of recognition that crossed his path. His indifference was palpable, his cane striking the ground with a force beyond the usual. As he made his way towards the elevator, passing by the golden statues, he couldn't help but notice the banner of the Minister of Magic, Cornelius Fudge, unfurled in a prominent position. Internally, Arcturus scoffed at the figure depicted on the banner. Entering the elevator, empty except for his presence, Arcturus cast a cold glance at those who tried to join him. "I think I'll wait a bit," murmured a man, fearfully averting his gaze from the intimidating aura emanated by Arcturus. The others around hastily agreed. Without showing any reaction, Arcturus pressed the last button on the second row to the right, marked with the number 10, where the Ministry of Magic courts were situated. The elevator took a minute to reach the promised destination. When the doors opened, they revealed a long, slightly dark corridor, completely deserted, without a soul in sight. Arcturus scoffed at the obvious attempt at intimidation, finding the chosen method trivial and trying to scare him. Such a ploy might have an effect on an inexperienced teenager, but not on him. Walking down the empty corridor, his steps echoing in the silence, Arcturus reached the end of the hallway. There, he was faced with two doors adorned with the emblem of the Ministry of Magic, M. Upon opening the doors, Arcturus found the seats of the Supreme Court nearly fully occupied, each occupant wearing a plum-colored robe adorned with an M badge on the chest. All the patriarchs of the lesser and greater houses were present. As he entered the court, these leaders rose from their seats as a sign of respect before resuming their seats in silence. The old patriarch nodded to everyone, pleased not to have been betrayed and not to have had to resort to extreme measures to punish the traitors. However, something caught his attention. Some of the noble houses that had previously remained neutral now rose to greet him. He knew that this was the result of his great-grandson's influence, who was already beginning to exert his power subtly over the entire British wizarding society. The House of Black was growing stronger with each passing day. Lifting his head slightly, Arcturus directed his gaze to the elevated main table of the Supreme Court. Seated in the principal chair was the Minister of Magic, Cornelius Fudge, and beside him, a plump woman with a particularly irritating professional smile, Dolores Umbridge. The presence of Cornelius surprised him, but at the same time, he knew Dumbledore was not behind this political attack. The man preferred to act personally rather than trust incompetent third parties to ruin his plans. Arcturus deeply shared this view: if you want something done right, do it yourself. As he was not the one on trial, he remained standing in front of the chair in the center of the Supreme Court. With the arrival of the witness, we shall commence the session of the Supreme Court, declared Cornelius, banging his gavel on the table, his voice echoing through the courtroom. After looking at all the present members, he continued, Lord Patriarch Black, Arcturus Black III, you have been summoned before this sacred court and are esteemed members to testify. Although still puzzled by this entirely arbitrary and seemingly illogical summons, Arcturus didn't conceal his disdain on his face, directing his gaze towards Dumbledore's representative in the Ministry of Magic, the Minister of Magic himself. Rumors circulated about the morning letters that Fudge supposedly sent to Dumbledore, seeking guidance every day. Arcturus despised figures like Fudge, who apparently received bribes from the Pureblood faction while obeying Dumbledore's orders behind the scenes. The man was not only a coward but also unfit for the position he held. He was merely a puppet chosen by the people to maintain the false facade that the ministry, despite being influenced by the noble houses, still belonged to the people. I fail to see why you're confused, Patriarch Black. Your grandson and great-niece escaped from Azkaban, releasing all the prisoners together. Perhaps at this very moment, the monsters you call relatives are murdering some poor Muggle family, Cornelius spoke loudly, looking at the man who brought recurrent nightmares to him. This attack was orchestrated by him and his small faction within the ministry, all with the purpose of weakening the influence on the man and perhaps fueling more hatred towards his cursed family, gaining more autonomy in the process. Such a pity if it's happening, Arcturus replied without changing his expression. Thousands could die, and he didn't care, but he had to care at this moment. At the same time, he condemned Cornelius to death for calling his grandson and great-niece monsters. Arcturus continued speaking despite the silence in the courtroom, but it doesn't change the fact that the escape occurred under your watch, Minister. He saw the man's face twitch slightly at his words, but it soon returned to normal, as if nothing had happened. Yet, Arcturus knew that Cornelius was seething inside. After all, the Minister of Magic was a simple-minded man who cared more about reputation than anything else, even his own life. Chapter 27, Wizengamot, 3. I'm curious, Minister, am I being accused of something here, or will this session just be an exchange of insults? If that's the case, I'd prefer to refrain from speaking. I see no point in engaging in dialogue with a man like you, declared Arcturus, his words echoing through the courtroom and prompting a momentary silence. The humor of some court members, restrained until then, seemed on the verge of bursting into laughter. The old patriarch was right. This court was a farce, lacking evidence and circumstances to justify its existence. The awkward silence that followed hung in the air as Cornelius struggled to contain his frustration, speaking in a louder tone than usual. I am the Minister of Magic, and I demand respect as the one tasked with administering this society, Lord Black, retorted Cornelius, his voice tinged with authority. You have been summoned to this court to testify and explain why magical traces associated with you were found in Azkaban, as well as to face allegations regarding your noble conduct. This time, a collective sigh of surprise echoed through the room, all eyes turning to Arcturus, who remained standing at the center of the court. So, is this it? The Minister of Magic relies on magical residues and unfounded accusations to support his claims. Arcturus retorted in the same tone, showing no weakness in the face of the accusations. Answer the allegations against you, Lord Black, intervened Dolores next to Cornelius, her shrill voice capable of irritating even the most insensitive ears. Arcturus directed his gaze at the petite woman, with wavy hair styled to the side, and replied coldly, "Prosecutor, I do not entertain allegations without evidence. If you wish for me to respond to something, prove it before this sacred court." "Very well, bring forth the evidence," ordered Dolores, surprising everyone, before ringing the bell on her desk, producing a loud and clear sound that echoed through the courtroom. A young man entered, carrying a silver tray containing a vial about 5 centimeters in size, which contained particles of dark and malevolent magical energy. Everyone in the room felt the magical residues contained in the vial and turned their gazes to Arcturus, as if affirming the truth of the allegations. "Irrelevant. I was on a mission 3 days ago, these could be my magical residues left at the scene. Furthermore, I feel that the minister is incriminating me with forged evidence, claiming they were found in one place when they were actually in another," he declared defiantly, disregarding the magical residues. The entire mission had documents related to it, he wasn't afraid they would use that against him. "Are you accusing this court of conspiring against you, Lord Black?" Dolores Umbridge spoke with a tone louder than usual. After a brief exchange of glances with Cornelius, she continued, "Keep in mind that the Ministry of Magic is the symbol of justice in our beloved country. Your words offend everything our society is based on, a fair place without distinction of status." Everyone in the jury was stunned by what they were hearing. The woman's words were so full of lies that they couldn't help exchanging bewildered looks with the court prosecutor. Justice? A truly impartial place, regardless of status? Since when has the ministry become that? Was the woman lost in some Avalon utopia? These thoughts echoed in the minds of everyone present. "Ha ha ha ha." Arcturus let out a deep, low laugh, as if he were hearing the most hilarious joke of all time. He then cast a sarcastic glance at Umbridge and remarked, "If the ministry were truly as the prosecutor describes, a fair place without class distinction, then we wouldn't have had a war 10 years ago. 73% of the witches and wizards currently holding positions in the ministry have connections to noble families or have attained their positions through nepotism and bribery." At that moment, he realized Dolores Umbridge's mindset. She was a woman who considered the ministry supreme, capable of manipulating everything and everyone by virtue of the status it represented in British wizarding society. However, she seemed to have forgotten or simply didn't care about the fact that the Ministry of Magic was created by the ancient noble houses after the dissolution of the Wizarding Council, which reigned in the time before the existence of the ministry. He and almost everyone present descended from the lineage of those who had ruled over these lands in the shadows. The Ministry of Magic was merely a tool to sustain the rights and interests of the noble houses. At the same time, if the ministry lost the support of the noble houses, both financially and structurally, then the Ministry of Magic itself would cease to exist, as the majority who were truly powerful were members of the noble houses. Arcturus and everyone in the jury could truly understand the purpose of the Ministry of Magic, but Dolores Umbridge did not. She was deluded by the idea that the power she possessed was supreme. That Arcturus's words left Umbridge unable to respond. Despite her arrogance, she was not foolish. If she dared to confirm the words of Patriarch Black, she would be politically annihilated in this country. Many people would be exposed, expelled, and some even imprisoned, thrown into Azkaban. Seeing that he had defeated one of his enemies, Arcturus focused his gaze on the Minister of Magic, Cornelius Fudge. Cornelius couldn't help but sweat under the intimidating gaze he received. Things were not going in the direction he wanted from the start. In the conception of the plan, they would constantly pressure Arcturus, and as the man showed weakness, they could obtain the benefits they always wanted, more autonomy in the Ministry of Magic and, at the same time, further tarnish the reputation of the House of Black. After all, at least in his mind, if the leader of the Pureblood faction accepted, the other members of the faction would have to accept as well. Unfortunately, things don't always go the way he wanted. Arcturus didn't show weakness, he was an old lion, but a lion was still a lion, regardless of age. Now, he had to deal with the consequences of his actions. The man would certainly take a big bite out of him. Suddenly, the doors of the courtroom, which had been closed before, swung open, catching everyone's attention. Arcturus couldn't help but cast a cold gaze at the man with an aged appearance dressed in a rather extravagant purple wizard's robe. The old man's icy blue eyes shimmered with magic and mystery. The long, snowy beard swayed with his subtle and calm movements. "Forgive me for the delay, matters at Hogwarts delayed my arrival," said the old man, looking at everyone with a friendly gaze. Cornelius couldn't help but speak aloud, his expression brightening with the unexpected arrival. "Albus Dumbledore." Chapter 28, An Unexpected Visit. While Arcturus was still at the Ministry of Magic, witnessing, Asterion had just returned from another of his forays into locations with high concentrations of negative magical energy. It was a weekly routine for him, creating cursed spirits for various occasions. After all, a cautious man was a living man. This time was no different. Asterion gazed at the crown floating above his hand with a look of satisfaction. The crown was black, with several wide-eyed red eyes, filled with horror, gazing in all directions. It was a frightening and intimidating sight. Knowing he couldn't rival the infinite amount of magical energy wielded by figures like Gojo and Sukuna, Asterion decided to create the Crown of Lamentations. It was a surprise for him to discover that the fifth bearer of creation and manipulation of cursed spirits had specialized exclusively in weapons, rather than animals, monsters, and legends like his predecessors. After studying about the fifth bearer, Asterion attempted to follow in their footsteps and succeeded, utilizing the records contained within the Heritage Book. The Crown of Lamentations had a sole purpose: to accelerate the regeneration of magical energy in his body. This crown was just one of the 6 items he prepared to compensate for his limitations. In addition to it, there was armor that greatly increased his defensive capability by absorbing impacts and energies, a cloak that allowed free movement through the sky, granting him the ability to fly, a sword capable of splitting atoms, gauntlets capable of enhancing his strength, and finally, a necklace that essentially made him invisible. The entire set of armor, weapons, and accessories followed the same dark and sinister theme as the crown. I think it's time to create a cursed spirit capable of dealing with Gojo and Sukuna's innate techniques, murmured Asterion as he walked to his room. He had some ideas on where to start. He just needed a large amount of negative magical energy. One of the reasons he considered creation superior to space was that he could essentially develop countermeasures based on other innate techniques, creating objects or monsters capable of neutralizing any innate technique. Entering his room, he found Narcissa lying on the bed, wearing a familiar transparent nightgown, propped up on 2 pillows as she read a book under the lamplight. "It seems you've returned from your nightly escapades," Narcissa remarked without taking her eyes off the book, gently turning the page. "It was a productive night," Asterion replied, walking to the personal bathroom of the room. The sound of the shower echoed through the walls shortly after. 10 minutes later, Asterion emerged from the bathroom with a towel wrapped around his waist, his hair still wet. Tossing the towel onto the chair, he grabbed a comfortable black silk pajama and began to put it on, regardless of whether Narcissa saw anything. Nudity was hardly something that could make him feel ashamed. Watching Asterion dress, Narcissa couldn't help but speak, her voice carrying nothing but concern and tenderness. "I don't understand your rush to get stronger, Asti. It seems like you're desperate to become stronger, regardless of the damage it causes to your body. That's not normal." Asterion, who was buttoning up the top of his pajamas, stopped upon hearing her words. He finished buttoning all the buttons and sat down on the bed, pondering over what he had been doing since awakening his memories at St. Marie Orphanage. Narcissa was right about something: he was desperate to become stronger. Since arriving in this world, he had never truly felt secure. That's why he trained until exhaustion, regardless of what his body told him. I just don't feel safe, sissy. It's like I'll die if I stop training," Asterion spoke without hiding his feelings. He trusted Narcissa enough to sleep in her arms without any fear, which in itself showed how much he trusted her. Narcissa remained silent and simply embraced Asterion. Unlike her, who grew up in a family where she always felt safe with her relatives, Asterion didn't have that. He faced everything he had to face as a child, which created a cautious, cold character with a strong urgency to become stronger. "Don't worry so much and have fun, Asti. Arcturus and I will protect you, until when I need you to protect me." Narcissa stroked his hair and joked at the end. But Asterion didn't find it funny. "I will protect you, even if it means burning this entire country." Looking into her eyes, he spoke each word with unwavering determination. Narcissa was someone precious to him, someone he had never had in 2 lifetimes. If anyone dared to hurt her, he would make that person's life a living hell, so much so that Satan would seem colorful next to him. "Don't be silly, burning an entire country would make you an enemy of the world." Although she knew he was exaggerating, Narcissa felt her heart submerged in a sweetness she had never felt in her life, as she felt he was being completely sincere with her. "If that's necessary, then everyone should die." Looking at her face, Asterion secretly thought. He admitted he had some mental issues, but who was truly sane in this world? Then again, everyone in his family was crazy in their own way. he just felt he loved too much. Compared to his predecessors, he was still an innocent little white rabbit. Both fell silent and gradually drifted off to sleep, enjoying each other's presence. In the cold dawn, Asterion, who was being used as Narcissa's personal pillow, opened his eyes, revealing a cold intent to kill in his red eyes, which seemed to gleam with a phosphorescent glow. Two individuals had breached the barrier of the Black Manor. Giving Narcissa a gentle kiss on the forehead, Asterion skillfully disentangled himself from her warm embrace and got out of bed. He slipped on his slippers and left the room, the shadow behind him quivering, revealing hundreds of pairs of red eyes. "Let's see who's brave enough to invade my home," he murmured, disappearing into the shadows of the corridor. Chapter 29, An Unexpected Arrival, 2. Asterion was perplexed. The barrier protecting the mansion had been personally constructed by Corvinus Black himself and reinforced by every patriarch of the House of Black over 1,000 years. One could say that the environment within the barrier was a world separated from the real world. It was nearly impossible to breach it by force, yet now, two people had managed to pass through without triggering any traps or alarms. Could it be an innate technique focused on space or specialized in infiltrating locations? Asterion pondered the possibilities but decided to focus on what was happening at that moment. "Nidhogg," Asterion muttered, forming a seal with his hands, his voice cold and devoid of emotion. As he faded into the shadows, he whispered, "Don't kill them too quickly." Meanwhile, outside the mansion, Bellatrix and Sirius, who had just crossed the barrier, felt an overwhelming pressure descending upon them. Under their surprised and shocked gazes, a massive curtain of darkness unfolded in the sky above the mansion. A cold rain began to fall from the sky, drenching them, and each drop seemed to possess a chilling murderous intent. Sirius felt his legs weaken as he was stared down by 6 pairs of demonic red eyes through the curtain of darkness. To his horror, 2 clawed, scaled limbs emerged from the curtain, followed by the most terrifying head he had ever seen in his life. "I think your nephew thought we were enemies invading," Bellatrix commented cheerfully as she watched the massive oriental dragon emerging from the curtain, which she recognized as the Black House's innate technique. "Why the hell are you excited?" Sirius shouted loudly, desperate in the face of the gigantic cursed spirit. "Don't be such a crybaby, pup, imagine being killed by a dragon." "That's so cool," Bellatrix exclaimed cheerfully, her eyes displaying nothing but admiration. She always followed the law of the jungle, the strongest oppress the weakest. If she were to be killed, it was because she was weak. Sirius rolled his eyes at Bella's comment, but before he could respond, a childlike yet extremely cold voice reached his ears. "I really want to know how 2 beggars managed to breach the barrier. Is it malfunctioning?" Sirius lifted his head and spotted the entrance of the mansion. Even in the darkness, he could make out a small figure standing at the door, with only red eyes glowing in the distance. Upon noticing the red eyes, Sirius widened his eyes and looked at Bellatrix, incredulous. "You really forgot to tell me something so important." "You didn't ask," Bella replied, displaying an innocent look. "Wait, Asterion, I am." Before he could finish the sentence, a crimson bolt struck just a few meters away from him. "I didn't give you permission to speak my name, beggar insect," Asterion cut him off, his icy voice sending shivers down Sirius's spine. The coldness and indifference in his voice were almost inhuman. "He was certainly raised by Arcturus, almost like a replica of the man," Bella whispered to Sirius, not being too discreet. Her eyes gleamed with a hint of mad fanaticism. Throughout her life, she had heard the legendary stories of the bearers of the red eyes. Now, before her stood one of them, and one who was only beginning his own story, his own legend. And how she yearned to partake in this tale replete with horror, blood, and viscera. Gripping the edges of her dress, or at least what remained of it after the escape, Bellatrix elegantly bowed while displaying a smile on her lips. "I apologize for the sudden visit, young heir Black. I am Bellatrix Lestrange, but I am in the process of divorce. Therefore, I will reclaim the honorable name Black once again, with your noble permission." She didn't seem like a crazy person at all, on the contrary, she appeared as an elegant lady who had lived for a long time in the nobility of British high society, which was not untrue. "Interesting, but you don't resemble Sissy in the slightest, Mrs. Lestrange," remarked Asterion, observing the woman covered in a dirty, torn dress with curiosity. Even covered in mud, he could recognize Bellatrix's features, black hair, green eyes, and a twisted smile, nothing like Narcissa. "Well, the 3 of us have many differences between us. I suppose my dear mother enjoyed playing outside quite a bit, if you catch my drift," replied Bellatrix, laughing with a dreamy and joyful voice. Suddenly, a voice emerged from behind Asterion. "Do not slander our mother, sister. She would reprimand you for speaking something so vulgar and improper." Looking back, the boy saw Narcissa wearing a silk robe to conceal her body, her pale hair flowing softly with the night breeze. "Are these two beggars really our family?" Asterion asked, still incredulous. Narcissa laughed and pointed to the woman, saying, "This is my sister, Bellatrix." "Yes. It's me, the amazing and wonderful magical girl, Bellatrix," declared Bellatrix, striking a pose filled with pride and arrogance as she gestured with 2 fingers. Asterion almost smiled at her presentation, almost. "I see you haven't changed at all, sister," Narcissa remarked nostalgically, watching her sister's performance. It seemed like she had gone back to her childhood, seeing the same presentation for the first time. Bellatrix nodded eagerly, placing her hands on her hips. She was very pleased with her sister's response. "This is probably your uncle, Sirius Black," Narcissa said, pointing to the man who looked skeletal, with a face covered in a poorly groomed and dirty beard. Looking at him, Asterion showed a strange look. "I apologize for almost killing you with a lightning bolt, uncle." Although he apologized, his tone and facial expression showed no real remorse for his actions. Pfft! Bellatrix couldn't contain her laughter, holding her stomach as she laughed loudly and clearly. Sirius couldn't help but feel embarrassed. He glared at Bellatrix and limped towards the mansion's entrance. Bella continued to follow him, still laughing and hopping along. "You two are in a sorry state," Narcissa commented, looking at them with one hand on Asterion's shoulder. "After escaping, we were pursued by 5 squads of Aurors. They seemed like dogs unwilling to let go of a bone," Sirius remarked, looking helplessly at his other cousin, Narcissa. "So, that's why Arcturus was summoned by the Ministry of Magic," murmured Narcissa, with a pensive expression. "Does that mean Aurors are coming?" Asterion asked as he dispelled the curtain of shadows above the mansion. Nidhogg expressed its displeasure with a loud roar as its 6 pairs of eyes fell upon Sirius. Nonetheless, it retreated back into the curtain, still discontent. Sirius smiled bitterly, feeling the angry gaze of the massive cursed spirit upon him. Fortunately, the beast couldn't harm him unless his nephew desired it. He wouldn't do that, or would he? Shaking his head, he responded to his nephew's question, "We managed to elude them with Bellatrix using a cursed spirit that could replicate appearance and magical aura. But, it's still possible for them to check the mansion. Between you two, take a shower and put on clean clothes. I'll have Kriaker bring something warm for you to eat," Narcissa said, gesturing for them to enter the mansion. "Bath time at last." Bellatrix ran inside, shouting excitedly. Sirius rolled his eyes at Bellatrix's childishness. He turned and thanked his cousin. "Thank you, Narcissa. We're family, we help each other out," Narcissa replied, putting her arms around Asterion's neck, responding with a faint smile on her lips. "Family," Sirius murmured to himself, hearing Narcissa's words. Chapter 32, Chapter 30, Black Family Reunion. At the dinner table, Sirius and Bellatrix, properly cleaned and well-dressed, could be seen devouring a steaming soup of meats and vegetables with great haste, as if they hadn't eaten in a long time. "I've missed edible food so much," exclaimed Sirius between spoonfuls of soup, his previously pallid face finally gaining some color, not as pale as before. "Well, I ate very well in Azkaban. The joy balls were great for a lively conversation, I painted many of their nails, they were definitely in need," added Bellatrix with a happy smile, while savouring her meal with joy. Asterion looked perplexed at his new cousin. Joy balls? Was she referring to the Dementors? Could they talk? More importantly, how the hell did she paint their nails? Curiously, he wondered what nail polish color she used. If it was pink, he would laugh a lot when he saw a Dementor with pink painted nails. He had many questions in mind, but he remained silent, showing a strange look to Bellatrix. In the short time he had known her, he could tell that the title of Witch of Insanity was appropriate. The woman was definitely crazy, too emotional and unpredictable like a hurricane. No one could guess what was going on in her head. Still, he couldn't help but find it amusing to be around her. She could even make him smile with her strange and crazy phrases from time to time. "You ate well, unlike me. The food they gave me, not even pigs would eat," murmured Sirius bitterly, recalling his time in Azkaban. He would never forget what he went through in that place, enduring all that hell just to one day seek revenge. Hearing his uncle's grumble, his father's brother, Asterion spoke coldly, everyone must bear the consequences of their actions. You chose to kill and were imprisoned. As for whether Sirius was innocent or not, it no longer mattered. The man had failed and been imprisoned, there was no turning back. A crash echoed as Sirius slammed his fist against the table, growling with anger. I didn't kill anyone. It was Peter, not me. That filthy, dirty, disgusting rat. When I find him. Each word escaped through tightly clenched teeth and eyes filled with hatred. Careful not to damage the table, you can't afford to pay for it, Asterion retorted sarcastically. He didn't care about all of Sirius's hatred and anger, the man chose to trust the wrong person and paid the appropriate price. As he had said earlier, when fate gives something, it also takes away. Has anyone ever told you that you're a heartless boy? Sirius remarked, observing his nephew, who remained indifferent to his outburst of anger, before slumping weakly into his chair and staring at the ceiling with a lost look. Faced with the disheartened and sad man in the chair, Asterion showed no pity. He spoke coldly, uncaring of his feelings, my pity, my disdain, or my words of comfort are irrelevant to your life. Instead of wanting someone to pat your head and tell you everything is okay, you should be seeking to become calmer and colder to seek revenge. You're no longer a child, uncle. Sirius couldn't help but feel stunned, he looked at his nephew, and the figure of Regulus seemed to merge with the boy. You're definitely his son, you're alike in that aspect, so realistic and pragmatic, Sirius commented with a bitter smile, unable to believe that a child seemed more mature than him. Asterion remained silent, he would be lying if he said he didn't want to meet his father. But he couldn't, the man was dead, and they could never meet. Narcissa shook her head and silently held Asterion's hand under the table, comforting him. Bellatrix merely watched the whole scene with a gleaming gaze. Suddenly, she stood up abruptly and walked over to Asterion with quick steps. Kneeling beside his chair, she lifted her face and gazed at Asterion with an admiring look. My master, I, Bellatrix Lestrange, not for much longer, wish to serve you eternally and aid in your future world domination. Bellatrix's words caused a silence in the hall, everyone, including Asterion, looked at the kneeling woman with surprise. How the hell did we go from a topic related to revenge to a pledge of loyalty? Asterion thought, lamenting Bellatrix's unpredictable behavior. I do not desire world domination, Bellatrix, Asterion said, unable to believe that those words were escaping his mouth at this moment. I understand, Master must want to remain discreet before his coronation, Asterion's words translated into a completely different meaning in Bellatrix's mind. Asterion merely put his hand to his face, covering his helpless expression. He changed his mind, being with Bellatrix was exhausting, the woman simply had no logic or reason. Looking at the still kneeling woman, he let out a resigned sigh and spoke with a cold tone. As I said before, I do not intend to dominate the world, and furthermore, do not call me master, I am not your master. Very well, master, I shall act in the shadows like a demon awaiting your sinister and dark malevolent orders. As if she could guess what he was thinking, Bellatrix, more like a nun speaking to God, spoke with devotion and determination to serve the Lord. As I said. Before finishing, he stopped speaking, he saw the fanaticism in the woman's eyes. No matter how much he tried to convince her otherwise, she always thought it was his plan. Asterion sought help from Narcissa and Sirius, but both merely turned their faces away, unwilling to get involved. This is going to be exhausting, he muttered, his tone filled with bitterness. Everyone was so absorbed in watching the spectacle of Asterion and Bellatrix that they didn't even notice the dining hall doors opening, revealing Arcturus with a cold and unyielding expression. First, his gaze fell upon Bellatrix kneeling at Asterion's feet, then his focus shifted to the skeletal man, whom he presumed to be his incorrigible grandson. A trace of guilt passed through his gaze, but it vanished as quickly as it appeared. Clearing his throat to draw everyone's attention, he spoke, "What an interesting sight, my favorite great-grandson, my elegant great-niece, my incompetent grandson, and my lovely great-niece, all gathered around a table. I must say, it's quite an unusual sight to behold. What nefarious plan are you currently orchestrating?" Almost instantly, everyone turned their heads and looked at Arcturus with surprise on their faces. According to the master, he must remain discreet before initiating his world domination, said Bellatrix, rising as she spoke with a proud tone, the tips of her fingers resting on her chest, striking a very elegant pose. Arcturus chuckled softly and spoke with a relieved tone. "You haven't changed, Bellatrix, as unpredictable as ever. Bellatrix simply smiled and embraced the man affectionately. I missed you, Arc, she said, her face nestled against his chest, her gaze like that of a girl wanting to be pampered by her grandfather. I missed you too, child, Arcturus replied, gently stroking her hair in a comforting tone. No matter how much society abhorred his great niece, to him, she would always be that little girl running around the house with a joyful expression. Afterward, they separated, and Bellatrix returned to her cheerful and commanding demeanor. Would you like a hug too, Sirius? Looking at her grandson, Arcturus asked calmly. I'd rather spend another 10 years in Azkaban, you arrogant old man, Sirius retorted sarcastically, scoffing. I see you're still as uncouth and uncultured as ever, Arcturus replied coldly. I'm not as hypocritical as you, Sirius countered without showing weakness. What an emotional reunion, after 10 years, grandfather and grandson meet again, Bellatrix wiped the tears from her eyes as she looked at the two with an emotional gaze. Asterion and Narcissa grimaced upon hearing this, an emotional reunion? It seemed more like an exchange of sarcasm and insults. Chapter 33, Chapter 31, Black Family Reunion, 2. Everyone stayed awake until the next day, waiting for the Aurors to arrive, but they never came, which surprised everyone, given that it was an obvious place to hide after an escape given the political complications they would have when searching the Black Manor. That's strange, they should have arrived long ago, Narcissa spoke, stroking Asterion's hair, his head resting on her lap. Her fingers gently traced the silky dark strands that easily slipped between her fingers. Maybe they focused on the other prisoners. Asterion replied, enjoying the strokes on his head, his voice slightly sleepy. He hadn't slept much last night, so he was almost drifting off to sleep with her touch. Everyone fell silent. Why release all the prisoners, to create more chaos? Narcissa asked Bellatrix in a slightly lower voice, apparently afraid of disturbing Asterion, who was almost asleep. I didn't release anyone besides the little puppy, it was Rodolphus who did it. He seemed particularly keen on killing me, although I don't understand why. Reclining on the sofa in a carefree manner, Bella spoke, staring at the ceiling as she counted how many imaginary stabs she had delivered to the sheep. Her eyes narrowed with a malicious and sadistic look, as if recalling something interesting. Sirius rolled his eyes at Bella's comment, she obviously knew the reason but pretended to be unjustly treated. Arcturus frowned, he looked at Bellatrix with a deep gaze, showing clear dissatisfaction. Both his great-niece's marriages were troubled, and he wondered if he had made a mistake in choosing their spouses. By the way, I'm surprised that my master is the son of Regulus. My first thought upon learning of his divine existence was to think he was Sirius's son, Bella spoke at that moment, subtly changing the subject. She felt she would be reprimanded by Arcturus if she continued to mention her ex-husband. Everyone deliberately ignored Bellatrix calling Asterion master and revering him as a god. Me too, Narcissa agreed with her sister's words. Arcturus merely nodded in agreement as he took a sip of his tea. Why? Asterion looked confusedly at everyone. Bella laughed loudly and spoke with a malicious smile on her lips. Sirius is a sexual libertine, as long as there's a pussy, I dare say he wouldn't hesitate to stick his dick in without a second thought. Sirius, who had been silently quiet, didn't expect to be insulted at this moment, he felt like a dagger had struck his heart, causing unknown emotional damage. I lost count of how many times I had to go to Hogwarts to deal with his sexual scandals. Arcturus looked at Sirius with disappointment and shook his head. Ouch! Another imaginary arrow pierced Sirius's heart. Remember, Asti, don't learn anything from him, this man is scum who only thinks with his lower head. This kind of man doesn't live for long, Narcissa warned Asterion sternly, who nodded in agreement with her words. Ouch! Someone who can't control their own desires is no different from an animal that only follows instinct, Asterion spoke, delivering another emotional blow to Sirius. Sirius was now lying on the sofa, defeated and powerless, with a bitter and painful smile on his face. I was young and didn't know what I was doing, Sirius spoke in his defense, but everyone, except Asterion, turned their gazes to him, a look of disdain and contempt. You were chased out half-naked by Lord Shafik when he found you in bed with his wife, Narcissa replied coldly, her gaze not hiding the antipathy she felt at the moment. What else could he say? Sirius simply lay on the sofa, wishing to find a hole to bury himself in with the shame he felt at the moment. What did his nephew think of him now? Bellatrix just laughed at her cousin's misery, not hiding the pleasure she felt in seeing him suffer. 15 days later, with less than 2 weeks until the masquerade ball, Asterion entered the living room to find Arcturus, Narcissa, Bellatrix, and Sirius gazing at painted portraits of 5 girls around the same age, between 9 and 10 years old. "What's going on?" Asterion asked, confused. "Your potential future wives," Narcissa replied, not taking her eyes off the papers containing all the information about the girls. Asterion looked surprised at the 5 portraits, 2 redheads, 1 blonde, and 2 brunettes. "This is so outdated, let the boy choose who he'll share his life with on his own," Sirius said, taking a large gulp of wine from the glass he held. He seemed pleased with the taste of the wine. "To be like you, single at 31, Narcissa retorted sarcastically. "Ouch." Sirius placed his hand on his chest and said with a sad tone. "That was cruel, sissy." Then, he took another sip of wine at 8 in the morning. She just scoffed and looked at Asterion with a gentle gaze and asked. "Any preference, Asti?" He pondered for a moment and said. "Maybe someone like Sissy. Elegant, cold, and strong, I don't want a pretty vase for decoration." Sitting on the sofa, he crossed his legs one over the other and continued speaking. "Instead of illusory love, I prefer companionship." Almost everyone looked strangely at the almost 10-year-old boy. They couldn't believe they heard such words from someone so young. Wasn't it normal for someone his age to think about love that way? Narcissa felt mixed feelings about his words. She was glad that he wanted someone like her, but at the same time, sad for his pragmatic view of life. But the entire silent atmosphere was shattered by Bellatrix's words. Stroking her chin, Bellatrix wore a pensive look and thought aloud. "I think I meet all the requirements, should I marry my master?" "You're 39, Bella," Narcissa spoke, looking coldly at her sister with a slightly hostile gaze. "Age is just a number, the prison just an exotic room." Offended, Bella retorted, rising from the sofa. "That doesn't change the fact that you're old," mocked Narcissa. "You meant to say I'm a mature woman," said Bellatrix, her tone dangerously sharp. She hated when people mentioned her age. "Enough of this childish argument. You're not children," Arcturus intervened at this point, his voice strong and grave, calming the two. Narcissa and Bellatrix exchanged cold glances and sat back down. Bellatrix muttered loud enough for everyone to hear her murmur. "Sissy, the possessive, is back." Remembering how Narcissa used to be as a child, the girl wouldn't let anyone play with her dolls. Especially her. Not that Narcissa was wrong, all of Bellatrix's dolls met a tragic end, all of them being decapitated, dismembered, and buried. Narcissa glared at her sister with a deadly cold look but remained silent due to Arcturus' presence. "According to your preferences, you have 2 options, Daphne Greengrass, a young witch of semi-grade 2, or Susan Bones, a grade 3 witch, both powerful for their age and likely to reach grade 1, especially Miss Greengrass, who has the potential for semi-special grade. In addition to them, Pansy Parkinson is also suitable, although her talent is slightly lower than the other 2. Politically, Susan Bones is the niece of Amelia Bones, head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. On the other hand, Daphne Greengrass is the heir to the prestigious Greengrass family, controlling a good portion of Britain's magical resources. According to the report I received about their personalities, Susan is more timid and reserved, while Daphne, on the other hand, bears a resemblance to Narcissa." Arcturus finished speaking and looked at Asterion, waiting for him to respond. Asterion couldn't help but think about Susan. She wasn't his type, her red hair might attract him, but that was about it. As for political power by marrying her, it wasn't much to begin with. The Bones family was only strong because of Amelia Bones. Once she left her position, the Bones family wouldn't be as important as it was now. Besides, with Amelia's personality, it would be difficult to gain any privilege. She was known to be impartial and cold. There was no way she could help with anything if he married her niece. On the other hand, Daphne was the heiress to the Greengrass family, both politically and economically. She was indeed the better choice. Combine that with what Arcturus described, and he had a future wife. But Asterion looked at Arcturus and asked, which of the 5 girls would be most beneficial for House Black to marry? This question brought a smile to the old patriarch's face. There was nothing that made him happier than seeing Asterion prioritize the family over his own interests. That was how the family would continue to stay strong, with family interests always coming first. Parkinson and Greengrass. Both control strategic materials, House Parkinson with alchemical items and House Greengrass with potion ingredients. Everyone in the room looked at Asterion, awaiting his response. To Sirius, his nephew might be experiencing life before marriage, but seeing how he conducted himself, he knew the boy was a true pureblood, unlike himself. Asterion pondered, weighing the pros and cons, but with a touch of selfishness on his part, he finally spoke up, Daphne Greengrass should be more suitable. Narcissa wore a displeased expression on her face, although it didn't show, she followed the pureblood ideology. The Greengrass family, on the other hand, was quite liberal with their marriages, regardless of whether they were half-blood or muggle-born. However, as it was Asterion's choice, she remained silent. I still think I'm more suitable. Bellatrix muttered in the background, but everyone ignored her. Chapter 34, Chapter 32, Masquerade Ball, 1. On the night of the masquerade ball, Asterion stood before the full-length mirror, clad in an elegant dark green suit adorned with delicate silver lines resembling the thorns of a rose, scattered across the chest area and sleeves of the jacket. A white scarf wrapped around his neck served as a tie, fastened by a dazzling ruby-studded golden brooch. The mask covering his face was dark in color, evoking the image of a demonic being with 10 red eyes, while black feathers on either side resembled the wings of a fallen angel. What do you think, Bella? Asterion asked the stunning woman, who was seated in a manner unfit for a lady. Diabolically beautiful, master, so much so that I want to lock you up in my basement, replied Bellatrix to Asterion, looking him up and down as if he were a succulent piece of meat. Her tongue seductively slid over lips stained with crimson lipstick. Asterion remained indifferent to the advances of his beautiful cousin. He had grown accustomed to the perversions of his crazy cousin, who didn't even care about his age. Honestly, it wasn't all that bad. These seduction attempts helped him prepare for the future, especially when he expected to deal with women trying to seduce him, increasing his resistance to such charms. He knew that beautiful women were one of the most dangerous things in the world. Sitting elegantly in his chair, he lightly tapped his legs, drawing the woman's attention. Bellatrix's eyes lit up, and she rose from the couch, kneeling beside the chair with her head on his lap. Asterion merely smiled and gently stroked her hair with tenderness. You're truly someone starved for attention, Asterion said gently as he admired Bellatrix's beautiful face. Even nearing 40 years old, due to magical energy, her aging had been slowed down, making her appear like a young woman of 25. Bellatrix pouted her lips upon hearing her master and spoke comfortingly, feeling his caresses in her hair. It's not my fault, master. Rarely did anyone love me. I see your husband didn't please you, sighed Asterion. Political marriages were like that, he himself didn't expect love, but he didn't expect both Narcissa and Bellatrix's marriages to be so troubled. Well, he dared to have a bastard outside of marriage, said Bella, her eyes half closed, lazily rubbing her face against his thighs. And what did you do when you found out? Asterion asked, curious. I killed both, the woman and the child in front of him. But he's too petty, hates me only for killing his pleasure sac and his immoral seed, Bellatrix replied with a sadistic and terrifying smile on her lips, although her face maintained an innocent expression. Asterion remained stoic in the face of the shocking revelation. Not that he was indifferent to the death of a child, but it was like hearing news of someone's death on the other side of the continent, irrelevant to his life. He shook his head and said calmly, and you still claim he has no reason to want to kill you. It doesn't matter. He will die by my hands in the end. After all, he's weak and incompetent, Bella replied indifferently. Killing the woman and the child was trivial to her. As for Rodolphus's hatred, she didn't care, in fact, she wanted him to hate her even more. Seeing the desperation in his eyes when he was about to die would be a delicious scene to witness. Asterion just rolled his eyes and then lifted her face with his index finger. He brought her face dangerously close to hers, causing her bodies to come closer and her breasts to press against his chest. What a naughty girl you are, Bellatrix, he whispered in her ear. His whisper was like that of a demon trying to seduce one into sin. Bellatrix's pale cheeks acquired a rosy hue of shyness. Asterion found amusement in her reaction, the killing and torturing machine in front of him seemed like a timid girl. For some reason, this brought him a sense of satisfaction. His finger slid over the soft skin of her cheek, down to her chin, and stopped at her lips, where he traced his thumb over her plump, red lips. The lipstick smeared and spread to the sides. Bellatrix's green eyes were clouded with raw desire as she sucked his finger as if savoring the most delicious delicacy in the world. But when she was ready to strip off all her clothes and surrender to pleasure in a carnal night of passion and wild sex, her master pulled back with a teasing laugh. Asterion finally felt satisfied with his revenge, He had spent weeks being seduced in various ways by this woman, but this time, he made her feel her own poison. I just remembered I have an appointment, perhaps later, Bella, said Asterion, rising and ignoring Bellatrix's hurt gaze. Don't be so cruel, master. My body is burning, Bellatrix said, writhing seductively, her cheeks flushing deeper. Furthermore, as your master, I forbid you to touch yourself, Asterion said, showing a smile behind his equally sadistic mask, causing Bellatrix to widen her eyes in shock. Without waiting for a response, he left the room with light and agile steps. The master is so cruel, I want him to tie me up and beat me. Should I call him daddy? Breathing heavily, she murmured to herself with a sensual look. Leaving the room, Asterion noticed the house elves tidying up the last details for the ball, moving swiftly and completing all tasks efficiently. Good work, praised Asterion, and the house elves seemed to receive the praise as if it were the most beautiful of praises. They instantly bowed and redoubled their efforts, performing tasks even more quickly, as if they were even more motivated. Watching the scene, Asterion merely shook his head, understanding why house elves had a low status in society. They fed off the magic of their masters, essentially becoming magical parasites and, as such, were undervalued, even more so than goblins. Continuing down the hallway, he found his great-grandfather standing in front of a huge painting, staring at it without blinking. As he approached, Asterion saw the painting of a tall man standing with his hand on the shoulder of a woman seated in a chair. Through the facial features, he recognized the man as Arcturus, and the woman, obviously, was his great-grandmother, Melania Macmillan. Did you love her? Asterion asked, observing the elegant woman with black hair and blue eyes, sitting with her hands on her thighs and a slight smile on her lips. Yes, more than anything. She was my beacon, illuminating my dirty and tarnished soul, his great-grandfather replied with a slightly hoarse voice, after a brief silence. He then turned to Asterion and continued. I hope you find someone like that, Asterion. This is a lonely and cold world, especially for someone who will be at the top of the world like you, and the top is lonely. Each word seemed to be etched into Asterion's heart. The boy who turned 10 today merely remained silent, gazing at the painting of his great-grandmother. Taking a silver watch out of his pocket, Arcturus glanced at the time marked on the watch and said, It's almost time, let's greet our guests. Arcturus then donned the mask on his face and walked towards the mansion's ballroom. His mask was plain black with gold details, a rather discreet yet elegant mask. Bellatrix and Sirius. Walking alongside him, Asterion asked. Don't worry about that, as long as they're both wearing masks, no one will recognize them, and even if they do, no one would say anything. Everyone in that room is our ally and needs the Black family to survive in the face of the most powerful wizard in the world, Albus Dumbledore, Arcturus said, stopping in front of huge doors. Or they just need to betray our house and turn to Dumbledore's side, Asterion said, looking at Arcturus with a cold stare. He would never trust a stranger, although it might seem somewhat paranoid, it was something he truly believed in. Always expect the worst from those you don't know. Perhaps that's why betrayal from someone dear is more painful. Then, kill the traitors and set an example of the expected fate for traitors. Arcturus looked directly into Asterion's eyes and spoke each word with a coldness capable of freezing a desert. Asterion nodded, showing a pensive look. If dialogue didn't resolve the issue, old ways always could. Ready? Arcturus asked. Yes, Asterion simply nodded. Without hesitation, Arcturus opened the huge doors, revealing a magnificent ballroom made of black marble. Chandeliers illuminated the space with their soft light while hundreds of men and women conversed in low voices. In the air, without any visible musical instruments, classical music played, creating a comfortable and cozy atmosphere. The guests, upon hearing the doors opening, suddenly fell silent, looking at the two figures who had just entered, one tall and the other short. The hosts of the party had just arrived. Chapter 35, Chapter 33, Masquerade Ball, 2. Observing the men and women in the ballroom, Asterion was dazzled by the profusion of elegant suits and dresses. The women paraded in stunning dresses, richly adorned with jewels and threads of gold and silver, while the men showcased themselves in expensive and extravagant suits. Everyone wore masks that covered half of their faces, adding an air of mystery and elegance to the slightly dimmer environment. The Gothic classical music echoed in the hall, without the visible presence of any instruments, as if the sound emerged from the air itself. Arcturus picked up 2 champagne glasses that floated gently in the air, keeping one for himself and offering the other to Asterion. A solemn silence filled the ballroom as everyone awaited his words. "It is with great honor that I welcome all of you on this special day," Arcturus began, his voice resonating with authority and a rare touch of warmth. "Today marks the entrance of a young wizard into our noble society. Someone who will be engraved in the history of magic." He paused, his gaze sweeping across all present before continuing. "May this be a moment of celebration and welcome for our dear Asterian Black Slytherin." With that said, Arcturus raised his glass to his lips and everyone followed suit, toasting along with him, including Asterian himself. Immediately after the toast, a round of applause echoed through the hall, filling it with an atmosphere of warmth and approval. However, despite his great-grandfather's warm gesture, Asterian couldn't help but feel embarrassed by the praise. The flowery expressions from his great-grandfather truly left him feeling ashamed. "It's time for you to greet our guests. I'll be busy chatting with some acquaintances," Arcturus whispered to Asterian as the applause subsided, gesturing for others to do the same. Asterian took a deep breath and nodded, resigned to the task at hand. He didn't particularly enjoy social interaction, preferring the company of a good book to the falseness of high society smiles. However, he recognized the importance of learning to socialize, especially given his position as the heir of the two most prominent houses. With an elegant posture, the young heir moved towards the crowd, greeting each person who approached to meet him. Asterian didn't have an exact notion of the number of people who greeted him, but they were certainly in the hundreds, all occupying prominent positions in society. Most were lords of their respective houses, while others were powerful magnates, whose coffers overflowed with gold. Each person who greeted him treated him with reverent respect, as if he were a true prince. However, behind the exaggerated and beautiful compliments, Asterian detected a touch of falseness and reverence. He wondered if that respect was due to the prestige of his lineage as a Black Slytherin, or if it was simply a deference to the future power he represented as a special grade wizard. But Asterian chose not to reject these people, as he was equally false in his greetings and conversations. He didn't consider himself hypocritical to that extent. Suddenly, while greeting one of the lords from one of the Russian houses, the music in the air changed rhythm, shifting from a brisk cadence to a slow and enveloping melody. It was clearly a signal for couples to dance in the center of the ballroom, and everyone consciously made space. Apologizing to the Russian lord, whose wealth was evident in his attire, Asterian approached the first lady he encountered, of similar age to his, and with a graceful bow, courteously asked, "Milady, would it be an honor for me to have the opportunity to dance with you?" "The honor would be mine, young sir," replied the girl, her voice cool and melodious. Asterian extended his hand, and the girl took it with a delicate and gentle touch. Walking to the center of the ballroom, he faced her and wrapped his arm around her waist with a gentle and reserved grip. She, in turn, placed her hand on his shoulder. To the melody of the music, they danced a waltz with an awkward yet elegant slowness. "You're not accustomed to dancing, Heir Black," she said, moving gracefully to the music, her blue eyes meeting Asterian's red eyes with striking intensity. Asterian wasn't surprised by her ability to discern his identity. After all, his eyes, even in the dim light, were remarkably distinct. He looked into the noble blue eyes behind the white swan mask and replied sincerely, "Dancing isn't one of my talents, especially considering this is my first dance." The girl fell silent, staring at him, before leaning slightly back, exposing her slender neck. The grip around her waist intensified, preventing her from falling completely, and she moved back towards him. "To be honest, I thought you'd be different from what I've heard from the rumors circulating through the country," she said, drawing closer to his face. "Courtesy of Rita Skeeter, I presume," Asterian replied with a near laugh at her words. He made a point to read every morning what that woman wrote about him, and he never tired of the countless conspiracy theories she could imagine. "You know?" she asked, slightly surprised, leaning forward to hear his words better. "I feel a strange fascination reading what that woman writes about me. She's only alive because I stopped my grandfather from killing her." The woman really managed to irritate him, explained Asterian, with a tone of admiration mixed with perplexity. "My father also mentioned how annoying that woman can be," the girl agreed, nodding along with his words. As they continued to dance, their conversations unfolded in whispers, an intimate exchange of words. Over time, the dance flowed with more grace and elegance, reflecting the growing harmony between them. Asterian felt comfortable talking to the girl. Perhaps it was because of their similar age, or maybe it was because she didn't treat him like a child. Although he displayed maturity, Arcturus and Narcissa always treated him with a certain condescension, like an adult speaking to a child. which was especially irritating. Time passed, and finally, the music came to an end, at least for its first part. Parting ways, Asterion elegantly bowed as he said, "It was an honor, my lady." She held the edges of her dress and inclined with equal elegance, replying, "The honor was mine, Heir Black. I hope you have a wonderful birthday." After saying this, she turned and walked away without looking back, disappearing among the hundreds of people. Asterion merely watched her back for a moment before continuing on his own path. He didn't ask for her name, as there was no need. They wouldn't see each other again, it was just a dance that he would cherish fondly in his memory. "Hey!" Asterion looked confusedly to the side as Baskerville alerted him that something harmless had landed on him. Glancing down discreetly, he found a ladybug at the edge of his jacket. "Ladybug? How did a ladybug get in here? Wait, ladybug?" Asterion remembered that Rita Skeeter's animagus form was a ladybug. Honestly, he admired the woman for her audacity and courage to infiltrate the Black Mansion. Before the ball, a breach was opened in the barrier protecting the mansion to allow the guests to enter. The woman probably sneaked in with one of the guests or was intentionally brought inside. Asterion decided not to act immediately, choosing to play with the woman for now. Climbing the stairs to the first floor of the ballroom, he found himself facing a beautiful view of the mansion's garden, holding a glass of champagne. Taking a sip of champagne, he savored the cold night breeze. Suddenly, he noticed a woman approaching from behind. As he brought the glass to his lips, he watched the woman draw near. She appeared to be around 40 years old, with black hair showing a few strands of white, elegantly arranged in a bun. She possessed a decent beauty, at least from what he could discern. The brown eyes behind the feathered mask seemed particularly shrewd. "Heir Black," greeted the woman, raising her own champagne glass as she sported a slightly arrogant smile on lips adorned with lipstick. Asterion remained silent, observing the woman as he finished the contents of his glass. It was evident that this woman was different from the other guests who had greeted him earlier. While they treated him with respect, she, on the other hand, spoke to him as if they were equals, a rather rude attitude considering they were in his house. The woman didn't seem bothered by Asterion's silence and continued to smile, taking out a business card from her small purse. Curious, Asterion took the card and read. R. There was only one letter on the business card and nothing more. He looked at the woman with confusion, waiting for an explanation. "Heir Black, we are an organization of scholars, researchers, inventors, and explorers," said the woman with a mysterious tone, leaving a series of possibilities and evocative images hanging in the air. Asterion wasn't particularly interested, it was obviously a suspicious organization, one he definitely didn't want to get involved with. Seeing that Asterion didn't seem interested, the woman wasn't disappointed. She spoke as she headed for the exit. "If you wish to know more, there's a method to reach me on the back of the card." After speaking, she left, leaving Asterion staring at the business card with a slightly intrigued look. "If I were a normal teenager, maybe I would have fallen for this cheap trick of deception. Unfortunately for you, I'm not a normal teenager," Asterion murmured to himself as the business card began to combust. Only a fool would enter such a suspicious organization, especially with such a childish trick the woman used to pique interest in the organization she was a part of. Perhaps a naive boy curious about the nature of secret organizations as depicted in history books would fall for this cheap trick. Tossing the still-burning business card into the air, he left the balcony with a smile on his lips. This party was proving to be more interesting than he had expected. As they arrived beside Arcturus, Asterion was about to speak when his body stiffened, the hairs on his arms standing on end as he felt the colossal magical energy at the entrance of the mansion. Although it was still blocked by the barrier, the aura was suffocating, resembling a miniature sun. Only the presence of that aura could exorcise cursed spirits of grade 4 and 3. He wasn't the only one who felt it, as all the grade 1 witches and wizards present looked towards the entrance with solemn faces. Arcturus couldn't help but murmur, "Special grade wizard." Asterion, standing beside him, widened his eyes in surprise. Arcturus didn't bother to respond and opened a breach in the barrier, allowing the entry of the mysterious wizard. "Go greet our unexpected guests," Arcturus said solemnly, looking at Asterion. This wasn't Albus Dumbledore's aura, he knew it well, so he knew it wasn't the man's. But since the mysterious man didn't conceal his aura, he wasn't apparently an enemy at first sight. Thus, he gave Asterion the task of greeting the mystery guest as a lesson. Asterion nodded and headed towards the entrance of the ballroom. It took about 5 minutes for the guests to arrive at the ballroom with the help of the house elf from the House of Black, monstro. As the doors opened, Asterion almost instantly focused on the elderly-looking man in the center, surrounded by 10 people. They all had a crest on their chest, to be more precise, a strange symbol that he recognized as the Deathly Hallows. Some party guests recognized the crest and paled. The elderly man was dressed in a very common black German suit. He looked like a gentle and warm grandfather with his smile and kind silver eyes resembling moons in the night sky. He held a wrapped gift in his hands as he approached Asterion. "Hello, young Asterion, I apologize for my late and unannounced arrival, but I had urgent pending matters. This is a gift for you," he said, looking directly at Asterion with a gaze that seemed capable of seeing into someone's soul. "Thank you, sir." Holding the gift, Asterion asked cautiously. "Gellert Grindelwald," he replied, with a friendly smile on his lips. Chapter 36, Chapter 34, Masquerade Ball, 3. Sighs of surprise echoed through the crowd of guests. They certainly hadn't expected to see the legendary Gellert Grindelwald appearing at the Black Heir's birthday party. It wasn't just them who were surprised, Asterion was too, but he looked calmly at the man who ruled Europe with an iron fist. Grindelwald dared to preach his ideals openly, and all the magical ministries of European countries dared not to act. No one wanted a walking atomic bomb full of rage in their country. So, they turned a blind eye to the man's deeds, counting on him not to dare do anything too serious. The European countries didn't care about what he did. Placing his hand over his chest, Asterion leaned forward and gestured gracefully. "Welcome, Lord Grindelwald. I hope the party suits your liking." "What a polite young man. Unfortunately I had no grandchildren or children," Gellert commented with a regretful tone at the end. Asterion almost rolled his eyes at the man's words, but the idea of Dumbledore being a man and still able to be pregnant was certainly a funny sight. "Although your former lover might think otherwise," Asterion remarked, looking at the man with an indifferent gaze. As he said this, he felt Grindelwald's gaze turn slightly cold, but the feeling lasted only for a brief moment. If he weren't as sensitive as he was, he would have thought it was just an illusion. Grindelwald let out a low, charismatic laugh. "You seem to know a few things, young Asterion," he said, his eyes gleaming unusually. Asterion felt a shiver run through his body in the presence of those phosphorescent blue eyes. He knew what the man was doing, seeing the future. For a moment, Asterion wanted to kill the man here and now. If Grindelwald knew his plans, it would be a complete disaster. Unfortunately, he couldn't kill the man, he was too strong. For a moment, he felt what Dumbledore felt when he fought against Grindelwald Aesir. The feeling of helplessness, knowing that no matter what he did, the opponent would know and retaliate in an unpredictable manner, was truly unsettling. "Ha ha ha ha." Suddenly, Grindelwald laughed, releasing a loud burst of laughter that echoed in the particularly silent hall at that moment. A few moments later, he stopped and smiled gently at Asterion, his eyes reflecting the boy's appearance as if he saw something extraordinary. "Young Asterion, you will certainly achieve great things. I eagerly await the day you reach that step." Grindelwald spoke, relaxed and cheerful at that moment, his joyful voice spreading throughout the hall, causing everyone to widen their eyes. Gellert Grindelwald had just praised the Black Heir. Some could imagine the repercussions of this act if it were leaked. Fortunately, everyone present was somehow connected to the House of Black and did not leak the information. Looking at the ladybug on his coat, Asterion pursed his lips, almost laughing, but finally restrained himself and managed not to smile. He would let the woman leave unnoticed, as the revelation of the news was of interest to him. Chaos had always been a ladder that few would climb, but he dared, regardless of how dangerous and risky things would become. "I will accompany you, Lord Grindelwald," Asterion spoke with an indifferent gaze, gesturing elegantly. "That would be kind of you, young Asterion." Grindelwald laughed and walked over to Arcturus first. After all, he was the host of the party. Observing the boy greet one of the most dangerous men in the world, if not the most dangerous, Daphne felt her heart beat faster with nervousness. Thanks to the green grass house's innate technique, Heart of Nature, she could feel the colossal amount of magical energy emanating from Gellert Grindelwald. The man was like a sun, radiating warmth and making the air thinner with his mere presence. "What's wrong, sister? Worried about your future husband?" Beside Daphne, a younger girl asked playfully, her fragile and gentle voice bringing the air of the green grass house back to her calm and indifferent demeanor. "Humph. Seems like you've gotten bolder while I've been away, Astoria." Daphne looked at her younger sister and pinched her cheeks mercilessly. "I was just kidding, no need to be so serious." Astoria, who had escaped her sister's clutches, complained to herself, while at the same time giving Daphne a teasing glance. And what about your future husband? I've seen his pictures, he looks very handsome. Perhaps too handsome, that could be a problem at Hogwarts. Daphne couldn't help but feel helpless as she remembered her future husband's appearance. She felt like her life would be difficult, especially at Hogwarts, where he would be surrounded by hormone-filled girls determined to win over her lovely husband. Daphne was especially worried about the girls from Slytherin. She could easily imagine how many orders these girls had received from their parents to seduce the black heir. Everyone wanted a piece of the pie, and that pie was Asterion Black, heir of the Black House and the Slytherin House. Please don't be so sad. Hearing her sister's helpless words, 8-year-old Astoria rolled her eyes at her hypocrisy. Although Daphne appeared very distressed, Astoria knew her sister was secretly enchanted and very pleased with her future husband. After all, she knew her sister had always dreamed of marrying a handsome, cold, and arrogant prince from Slytherin, but she didn't expect that dream to come true so perfectly as she wished. Not only a black, but also a direct descendant of magical royalty, the Slytherin house. Looks like you're envious, sister, Daphne teased without hesitation. Yes, I am envious. You're marrying a prince, and I'm marrying a golden cat trying to pass itself off as a powerful lion, Astoria replied, muttering and showing herself very dissatisfied with her future spouse. At their first meeting, she had almost punched that arrogant face that seemed so punchable. She just hoped Draco would improve as he grew up and became more mature, otherwise, she would prefer to marry someone else. Not that she didn't like an arrogant man. But arrogance based on one's father's prestige, as Draco proudly displayed, certainly wasn't attractive to her. Seeing the two daughters whispering together, the green grass couple simply shook their heads and turned their attention back to the party hosts and the most illustrious guest of the party. You have an incredible grandson, Arcturus, Grindelwald spoke, looking up at the man who was about 20 centimeters taller than him. They had met before, about 20 years ago, when Arcturus was on a joint mission with other countries in Europe. I can say the same about your adopted son, replied Arcturus, turning his gaze to the young man with medium-length black hair who always faithfully followed Grindelwald. The other acolytes were forming a formation about 10 meters away from the Dark Lord. Grindelwald nodded and spoke slowly, don't praise him too much, he might get arrogant. Adopted son. Asterion looked at the young man with curiosity. He appeared to be around 25 years old, but a wizard's appearance often deceived, so Asterion assumed he was much older than he appeared. Noticing the confusion on Asterion's face, Grindelwald introduced him, placing his hand on the young man's shoulder. Aurelius Dumbledore, my adopted son. If Grindelwald's arrival shocked the audience, then Aurelius's identity left everyone speechless, not understanding what was happening at the moment. Asterion looked at the young man, surprised. After all, that was the surname of the most powerful wizard in the world, Albus Dumbledore. He couldn't recall if he had read about this character in the books or seen him in the movies, but he thought it might be from the new films he hadn't watched due to lack of time. Hello, Aurelius. Approaching him, Asterion greeted him as he should as one of the hosts. Black heir. After a brief silence, he replied, looking at Asterion with his black eyes. A short and cold response, without any sign of wanting to initiate a conversation, something Asterion could probably understand. Conversing with people was tiresome. But, observing Aurelius, Asterion couldn't help but be surprised. There was something strange about Aurelius Dumbledore. In his senses, it was as if his magical energy moved on its own, as if it were alive. However, that was impossible. Magical energy was just that, energy without consciousness. It was like a program with complex and infinite orders, created by the natural order of things, but without intelligence. But in Aurelius's case, it was as if it were alive and had become a separate entity from the host, two souls in one body. That was the most accurate answer to his confusion. Another thing that intrigued him was that his magical energy was actually negative magical energy. This puzzled him. Was Aurelius human or a cursed spirit, perhaps a hybrid? If that were the case, could cursed spirits reproduce sexually, or was it another process? There was also the option that Grindelwald had created him artificially, but he had no idea how. In Asterion's mind, the idea of capturing Aurelius and dissecting him while still alive on the surgical table appeared, but it was suppressed the moment it emerged. Aurelius was a semi-special grade wizard, and he always stayed by Grindelwald's side, making it impossible to kidnap him without anyone knowing. Aurelius, who was looking at Asterion, couldn't help but take a few steps back. For some reason, The eyes of the boy in front of him were particularly frightening, he looked at him as if he saw a rare and extinct specimen. Seeing this, Asterion, realizing he had exhibited inappropriate behavior, cleared his throat, feeling somewhat embarrassed, and offered a polite smile. "If you need anything, please don't hesitate to ask, I would be here to help with anything." Aurelius nodded and returned to stand behind Grindelwald while cautiously eyeing the boy who emitted dangerous emotions. Asterion didn't insist on speaking with Aurelius and walked among the guests, greeting everyone and asking if they were enjoying the party when suddenly, he overheard the conversation of 3 men in the background. "Have you heard the rumors? 5 squads of Aurors have disappeared in pursuit of Bellatrix Lestrange and Sirius Black. They've been missing for over 3 weeks and still haven't been found. The families are still searching for the missing ones, but nothing so far, as if they've vanished from the world." Word has it that Rufus was furious about the incident and personally went to find his missing men. Asterion, who was listening to everything, pondered deeply. According to Bellatrix, she had evaded the Aurors by using a cursed spirit capable of simulating aura and someone's appearance, but was that really the case? "You weren't invited, Lucius," Narcissa said, her voice especially cold, as she looked at her husband through a golden mask. "Still upset, Narcissa?" Lucius, the patriarch of the Malfoy family, took a sip of champagne and spoke with disinterest. "Upset? Don't make me laugh. If I were upset about something, you'd be dead, and I'd make sure it was very painful." Narcissa's eyes couldn't help but grow even colder, his carefree attitude made her particularly irritated. "I don't understand your anger, they're just a few mistresses, I'm not stopping you from having your toys if you want." Lucius looked at his wife, and noticing her cold and deadly gaze, he wasn't afraid and finished his champagne glass. Lucius's words were the last straw for her, she laughed coldly and spoke with such a deadly look that it sent a shiver down everyone's spine. "Fine, first you call me petty for not allowing you to cheat on me, now you call me a slut. Do you really think I'm someone who takes everything silently?" With her words, she took off the wedding ring on her ring finger and threw it into Lucius's champagne glass as she turned away, but before leaving, she left her words behind. "You're lucky this is Asterion's birthday, otherwise, I would announce to everyone here that I'm divorcing the trash that is you." Looking at the wedding ring in his glass, Lucius smirked and muttered to himself, "Narcissa, you think you're so amazing and noble, but you're nothing but an emotionless doll. You're doing me a favor by divorcing me, at least the blame will fall on you, of that I'm sure." As the party came to an end, Asterion and Arcturus stood side by side, each holding a champagne glass, observing the hundreds of guests awaiting their next words. "Firstly, I'd like to thank all of you for sharing this moment with me. It's a special memory that I will cherish. At the same time, I want to express my gratitude to Narcissa, my dear cousin, who organized this entire ceremony with nothing less than perfection," began Asterion, addressing the crowd who listened to him in silence. He continued with his speech, "Lastly, I toast to all of us, to happiness, to health, and to success. May we face the challenges that the future holds for us with courage and determination. Thank you again to everyone, and may tonight continue to be an unforgettable celebration, as it is for me." Watching Asterion speak softly in front of hundreds of people, Arcturus nodded satisfactorily. In comparison to when the ball began, the boy had made great progress. When Asterion finished speaking, a barrage of applause echoed in the hall, everyone clapping as they looked at the small figure raising the champagne glass. Grindelwald clapped slowly as his smile grew, almost reaching the edges of his face. A terrifying and exhilarated smile. "I hope you grow up quickly, Asterion. I'm really looking forward to when you take the true stage," murmured the Dark Lord, his gaze focused on the boy who would either bring about the world's destruction or save it, depending on how cruel fate would be. Chapter 37, Chapter 35, 3 years. 3 years later. August 25, 1993, England, Lancashire County, City of Lancaster. Boom! A loud explosion erupted from a school on the outskirts of Lancaster, reducing the historic education building to mere rubble, with a cloud of dust spreading in all directions. Beastly roar! From the dust cloud emerged a huge green creature roaring towards the skies, a massive, flabby humanoid. Its enormous mouth, capable of swallowing entire buildings, dripped venom and acid onto the ground, melting it into craters, rendering the soil infertile for any life to thrive. On the other side, emerged from the dust cloud, a figure gliding skillfully through the air. He was a young man of about 16 years old, standing at 174 centimeters tall, clad in black armor with a crown floating above his head. The entire armor bore eerie red eyes, which seemed alive as they blinked and closed at a slow pace. The crown floating above his head mirrored the same eerie appearance of the armor. Looking at the destroyed school, Asterion knew the government would have difficulties explaining why a perfectly intact school had disappeared completely. Fortunately, he had used a curtain before the battle. But it wasn't time to dwell on that, and Asterion focused on the cursed spirit of special grade. Particularly the cursed spirit wasn't too strong for him, a special grade wizard, but the innate technique of the cursed spirit was especially annoying. Acid and poison. With the simplistic mind of the cursed spirit, it wielded its innate technique as nothing more than a simple mist. The mist was capable of poisoning and corroding everything it touched, rendering the land around the school uninhabitable, at least for a few months. But that was it, just irritating. It would be easier if it used spells, but considering the disaster it would be if it cast a spell, he refrained from using his own spells, especially without the wand to control the spell's accuracy. At times, Asterion wished that casting spells was as easy as using his innate technique, but it wasn't the case, especially for him, who had a colossal magical energy that was mostly uncontrollable. Floating in the air, he makes a seal with both hands. Asterion summoned a massive cloud of darkness in the dark sky within the curtain. From it emerged a colossal silver serpent, its colossal size seeming to cover the entire school grounds, with silver scales adorned with symbols resembling pupil-less eyes. Ouroboros. Looking at his cursed spirit possessing an innate technique related to fate, Asterion glanced coldly at the humanoid cursed spirit still roaring towards him. The cursed spirit didn't attack him, it seemed it could sense the mortal danger he was feeling at the moment. Which wasn't surprising, given that high-grade cursed spirits were capable of speaking and thinking like humans and other intelligent races. But the fear was short-lived, as the cursed spirit opened its mouth and released a huge cloud of venom and acid, covering the entire area within the curtain that separated the inner realm from the real world. However, something incredible happened. The silver serpent in the sky bit its own tail. In the next moment, the entire cloud of venom and acid seemed to rewind in time. Even the cursed spirit appeared confused, but his confusion lasted only a second before he let out a furious roar. Every time he moved, he returned to the same spot he was in, as if trapped in an eternal loop. Seeing the huge, furious spirit finally trapped, Asterion was pleased with Ouroboros' ability. The serpent was one of his trump cards to use against the bearer of the six eyes, and seeing the results of his creation, he was very satisfied. Now, let's play, as I really need to unwind, Asterion murmured to himself as he fell from the sky towards the cursed spirit. As he descended, a pair of black gauntlets appeared in his hands. Upon landing on the cursed spirit's head, Asterion closed his fist and gathered magical energy before delivering the punch. Boom! The entire head of the cursed spirit deformed, green blood splattered onto Asterion's face. He didn't stop and continued delivering another punch, even stronger and charged with magical energy, exploding the cursed spirit's head this time, silencing the creature's roar. A large amount of putrid green blood splattered hundreds of meters around. Not waiting for the cursed spirit to regenerate, Asterion reached out and used his innate technique, creation and manipulation of cursed spirits, to control it. A huge sphere of blue magical energy appeared around the gigantic cursed spirit, slowly melting it until it transformed into a blue sphere in Asterion's hand. This is the 5th special grade cursed spirit I've exercised. With this one, I've completed the Ministry of Magic's evaluation. I'm officially the 2nd special grade wizard in England and 32nd in the known world today. Looking at the blue orb in his hand, Asterion curved his lips into a smile and swallowed the cursed orb without hesitation. Along with this one, Asterion had about 15 special grade cursed spirits, 5 exorcised and 10 created over 3 years of insane training, during which he just wanted a bit of vacation before continuing his infernal journey. With this mission completed, Asterion could finally return home after 3 months of absence. But hunting down 5 cursed spirits took longer than he expected, especially with these beings able to change their own negative magical energy, making their exact location difficult, camouflaging themselves with a lower grade than they truly were. But these 3 months were not in vain, they brought him a tremendous increase in strength, as he created and captured so many cursed spirits, which was considered quite satisfying. Closing the curtain, the sky gradually returned to its beautiful celestial blue, but the destruction of the school building remained unchanged. But there was nothing Asterion could do, it was better for the school's destruction than the entire city, which could happen if the cursed spirit left its place of origin. It wasn't common for this to happen, but unfortunately, it wasn't an absolute rule. In his 4th exorcism, unfortunately, this happened. He arrived late, and a significant part of a city in Gloucestershire had been destroyed. The government had told the people that the cause was a large accidental explosion, but Asterion knew that a cursed spirit had left its place of origin and caused more than 20,000 casualties before being exorcised by him. When the veil was lifted, Asterion saw that the entire school area had been cordoned off with several yellow and red perimeter tapes. Behind the tapes, several government cars were parked, each bearing a logo of a sword and shield crossed with an acronym below. MI0. It was the secret government organization responsible for bridging the wizarding world and the normal world. It had the authority to evacuate an entire city if necessary. I presume that since we're alive, the cursed spirit has been exorcised. Asterion looked at the middle-aged man in a suit and nodded, signaling that he was correct. The man took out his cell phone and spoke, "The special grade cursed spirit has been successfully exorcised." After reporting, he pocketed the phone and pulled out a cigarette, lighting it as he looked at the young man with a complex expression. He had worked for over 20 years in MI0, but he never got used to seeing children fighting these monsters. To him, these children should be in schools playing and hanging out with friends, not fighting to the death against these abominations. Unfortunately, the world didn't work as he wanted. "Good job, Agent Black," he said, blowing a smoke ring from his mouth. "Thank you as well for your hard work, Agent Grey," Asterion also sincerely thanked. In these 3 months, he had seen how hard these people worked to make the world a little better, enough for normal people to live their lives normally. Edward Grey simply nodded and replied, "It's the least we can do while you're risking your life, Agent Black." He continued speaking, this time with a sincere smile, "By the way, congratulations on becoming the second special grade wizard in England." "Yes, but I'm not as happy as I thought I would be," Asterion said, looking at the tired man in front of him, sighing while maintaining a surprisingly cold gaze. He was remembering the tragedy that had occurred 3 weeks ago. Seeing over 20,000 bodies was truly a hellish sight that he never wanted to witness a second time. Edward also sighed. He was on the case when the special grade cursed spirit had escaped from its place of origin. Even after working in this world for 20 years, he probably never forgot that infernal scene. Flicking the cigarette ashes away, Edward spoke to Asterion with a serious look. "The occurrences of cursed spirits are increasing, almost 50% more than last year, and they're still rising." Asterion remained silent, obviously aware of this. It wasn't just happening in England, all countries were suffering similarly, and the existence of the supernatural was on the brink of being exposed at any moment. This world was heading towards an end worthy of an apocalyptic scenario. "I just hope God helps us," Edward showed a helpless look on his face and spoke, looking up at the sky, apparently hoping for some divine salvation. Unfortunately, God had given humans free will, he had left the fate of humanity to be decided by itself. Asterion shook his head and bid farewell to the veteran agent, leaving with a cold and indifferent look on his face. "God will help, whether we want it or not," he muttered to himself. Chapter 38, Chapter 36, 3 years, 2. Entering the Black Mansion, Asterion only saw a shadow flying towards him. In the next second, he felt an extremely tight embrace around him. Looking at the woman clinging to him, he showed a helpless expression and stroked her back. "Missed you too, Bella." "Master, I missed you so much, let's kill some people to relax." Clinging to her master's body, Bellatrix looked at Asterion's face and showed a look full of anticipation. Her green eyes seemed to shine with the idea of killing. "Tempting, but I'll have to decline for now." "Get off me." Shaking his head, Asterion declined and lightly tapped Bella's buttocks, signaling for her to get off him. Bellatrix looked disappointed and pouted her lips as she gazed at Asterion with a hurt expression. Nonetheless, she released him, though she remained holding onto his arm. Observing the 40-year-old woman behaving like a 12-year-old girl, Asterion let out a resigned sigh and walked to the living room with Bellatrix still clinging tightly to his arm. Entering the living room, he soon saw the old Black Patriarch. The man was 93 years old and still looked majestic. He was sitting in an armchair reading his newspaper. Next to him, there was a steaming cup of tea waiting to be sipped at any moment. Noticing his arrival, the man opened a smile, folded the newspaper, and placed it on the table. "Welcome back, Asterion," he said, looking emotionally at the tall young man for his age. Unbeknownst to him, the boy who walked through the same doors 3 years ago had now turned into one of the most powerful men in the country. "Congratulations on becoming England's second special grade wizard," Arcturus said, even though he knew this would eventually come. he still felt incredibly pleased and proud. Now, he could leave this world peacefully knowing he had left behind a worthy heir. Seeing the two conversing without paying attention to her, Bellatrix spoke very discontentedly. "I'm here too, don't ignore me." "Bellatrix, you need to learn not to interrupt a conversation," Arcturus sighed and spoke in a tone full of helplessness. No one but him knows what he went through in those 3 months. Without Asterion to control her, Bellatrix practically became an uncontrollable madwoman. It wasn't once or twice that he found Bellatrix covered in blood with a sadistic smile on her face. Fortunately, the woman knew how to cover her tracks, otherwise, the Black Mansion would be a common destination for Aurors to visit. As for whom she killed and tortured, Arcturus was too lazy to ask. He was already old and didn't want to care about what Bellatrix did with her life. "Always so old-fashioned," Bellatrix muttered discontentedly, hearing Arcturus grumble, but upon seeing Asterion's cold expression, she remained silent. "I'll take a shower, we'll talk more at lunch," Asterion said, shaking his head at Bella's silence and addressing Arcturus. "Very well," Arcturus nodded and returned to reading his newspaper calmly. Feeling the warm water enveloping his body, Asterion let out a comfortable sigh. He rested his head against the bathtub and gazed silently at the bathroom ceiling. Not only did he not feel tired, but it had been 6 months since he'd felt any fatigue at all. It had been half a year since he possessed the magical energy necessary to be considered a special grade wizard, which was 100 times the energy of a grade 1. To put it into perspective, he felt like he could summon Nidhogg the size of the city of London, essentially destroying it in the process. He understood perfectly why special grade wizards were considered weapons of mass destruction, each one possessed an amount of energy capable of rivaling that of an atomic bomb. Asterion didn't know how much magical energy he currently possessed, but it was still growing, showing no signs of stopping anytime soon. This meant he hadn't reached his peak yet. Raising his hand, Asterion created an oval barrier above it. If one were to look inside the dark barrier, they would see a completely different scenery from the world outside, as if it were a different world altogether. It was the ultimate technique one could achieve using their inborn technique. Domain expansion. Domain expansion was achieved by expanding the inborn domain with magical energy while using a barrier to construct it within a separate space. The caster then infused their inborn technique into the barrier to complete the expansion, allowing them to deploy their ability throughout the domain. From the outside, the barrier of a normal domain is usually fully enclosed, making it appear as a floating black sphere that can even be moved slightly if needed. Honestly, it wasn't difficult if you had enough magical energy. For example, Asterion could use it when he was still a semi-special grade wizard. Using his domain expansion without a barrier, like Sukuna, proved to be a difficult challenge to accomplish. No matter how hard he tried, it seemed impossible to manifest his domain without a barrier. Firstly, there was nothing to sustain the manifestation as support, even the air itself was unsuitable as it wasn't a conduit for magical energy, making the entire technique impossible. Asterion himself was doubting whether he could do something like that. Perhaps he couldn't even accomplish it due to the worlds being different. Magical energy and cursed energy seemed similar, but they were very different, with the latter being much weaker than the former. After all, magical energy itself altered reality, making it possible to fully manifest the potential of the inborn technique. This means that if Gojo were born in this world, he wouldn't be OP like in the anime, he would be a god, capable of altering, manipulating, and controlling space as if it were a ball of paper. This was one of the reasons he was concerned about the Bearer of the Six Eyes. It was a completely insane and broken ability. Fortunately, he could fight without fear against the other knowing that he wouldn't be beaten to death like other extras. Asterion never thought his inborn technique, creation and manipulation of cursed spirits, was inferior to Limitless. While Limitless could do anything with space, he could counterattack by creating something. But even without his inborn technique, he was confident in fighting using spells. Not that he could cast any at the moment, believe me, he tried a simple lighting spell and manifested a damn small sun that could be seen from the other side of the city if it weren't for the mansion's barrier. Since then, he refrained from using magic without the wand to control the power of the spells. Without the wand to control the power of the spells, all the spells he cast would be amplified to an insane level with the huge amount of magical energy he possessed. It might seem strange that he could perfectly use his inborn technique, but not spells. However, understand that one was like using his own hand. For example, you think, and it happens. His magic would automatically provide energy when needed, just like the body's energy, as natural as possible. Spells, on the other hand, required not only gestures but also focusing on the act and having the will to cast them, coupled with the large amount of magical energy he needed to control. This made things extremely difficult for someone without a wand to aid him. Arriving at the dining hall, appropriately dressed, Asterion found Arcturus, Bellatrix, and Narcissa waiting at the table. After the divorce 3 years ago, Narcissa moved back to the Black House and reclaimed her old surname with Arcturus' permission. As for Sirius, he had been missing for 3 years, disappearing shortly after his birthday. No one knew where he was, but whether it was Asterion or Arcturus, they had a vague idea of his whereabouts. Arcturus seemed indifferent to Sirius' departure, but Asterion knew that the old patriarch had suffered from his grandson's abrupt departure. After all, Sirius was his grandson, his son's son. Nevertheless, Sirius chose to be with his other family, the Potter house. Narcissa, noticing Asterion's arrival, stood up and hugged him while speaking. "Congratulations on officially becoming a special grade wizard, Asti." She gave him a gentle kiss on his cheek and looked at him with a proud gaze, like an older sister proud of her younger brother's accomplishments. "Thank you, Sissy," he replied, returning the hug kindly. "I think I'm going to vomit rainbows," Bellatrix muttered with the sweet scene unfolding before her. After the scene, everyone sat down and conversed while eating. "Ready for Hogwarts?" Cutting a piece of beef with his knife, Arcturus asked, putting the meat in his mouth with the fork. "Yes, I've personally ordered my custom wand from Lord Gregorovitch. It should be delivered one day before Hogwarts. As for other things, everything's ready, just need to pack," Asterion said, taking a sip of wine from his glass. He had kind of gotten a bit addicted to alcoholic beverages, although none could really make him drunk, they just served to satisfy his palate. Entendido, acquiesced averseo revisada e traducida do texto. Knowing that Asterion was going to Hogwarts, Narcissa felt disheartened. He had just returned from a 3-month absence, and now he would be spending half the year at Hogwarts, although he could return during summer break and Christmas. But for her, who loved being by his side, it was a cruel torture. "Sissy, you should be worried, we don't know how many girls will want to suck him." Bellatrix, seeing her sister's despondent look, didn't hold back and said wickedly, causing everyone at the table to look at her with a helpless gaze. The image of Bellatrix's words appeared in Narcissa's mind, causing her to viciously stab the fork into the meat on her plate, resulting in a sound of something breaking. "I don't think that's going to happen, Bella. I'll be in a school for learning." Seeing things gradually slipping out of control, Asterion spoke calmly as he wiped the corner of his mouth with a napkin. "Do you know anything interesting about Hogwarts, Master? Because of the life-threatening missions, the stress at Hogwarts is quite high. Imagine 16-year-olds stressed with near-death experiences and full of hormones. Believe me when I say that the exaggerated number of broom closets at Hogwarts serves a very special purpose." Rowena Ravenclaw, as smart as ever, Bellatrix opened her mouth and put the piece of meat in it, then licked her lips sensually. Her green eyes provocatively glanced at Narcissa, who ate in silence. Bellatrix knew her sister. Narcissa had always been possessive since childhood. She never gave anything to others, everything that was hers and no one else's. Asterion was considered hers and no one else's, even if she didn't love him romantically, he was hers. Bella felt a little pity for her master's future wife, but only for a moment. She would delight in watching the battle that would ensue between the future Lady Black and Narcissa Black. At the same time, she couldn't imagine what Narcissa would do if she found out that she had deflowered her beloved Asterion. Remembering the night of carnal and animalistic passion, Bellatrix's tongue slid over her lips as she looked at her master with a hungry and desirous gaze. Perhaps noticing her eyes, Asterion gave her a stern look and continued eating in silence. Seeing things getting even more chaotic, Arcturus sighed and showed a bitter look in his black eyes. This house hadn't been quiet for long since everyone arrived. Bellatrix and Narcissa always fought over the smallest things, especially with Bellatrix knowing how to push all of Narcissa's buttons, leaving her angry at all times. "That's enough from both of you, eat your food in silence. You two look like two quarrelsome animals. Asterion, come to my office before going to bed." Tapping his fork on the table, Arcturus spoke in a grave and powerful tone, looking at his grandnieces. Narcissa glared furiously at Bellatrix, who only smiled, showing her impeccably white teeth as she played with the fork with her fingers. At night, Asterion stood beside Arcturus as they descended a spiral staircase of stones that delved deeper into the underground with each step. The path was illuminated by a Lumos spell cast from the tip of Arcturus's wand. After descending for another 5 minutes, Asterion, who was becoming surprised by the depth they had reached, finally saw the end of the stairs, which led to a long corridor completely shrouded in darkness. Fortunately, Arcturus was still using lumos to illuminate the surroundings as they both silently walked through the long corridor made of stones that seemed particularly ancient. At the end of the corridor, Asterion was met by a metal door with a pentagram written in blood and runes that he didn't even recognize, but identified as ancient runes. Make a cut on your hand and touch the pentagram. After gazing at the door for a moment, Arcturus turned to look at his great-grandson. Although surprised by the request, he obeyed the order and cut his hand with a dagger handed to him by Arcturus. With blood still dripping from the wound, he touched the door. As his blood made contact with the pentagram, it came to life, illuminating all the runes, and the sound of the door unlocking echoed instantly. Arcturus opened the door, and Asterion followed him, still confused by the entire situation. Asterion, have you ever wondered what happens to the cursed spirits we exorcise in life when we finally die? In an environment of stone illuminated by torches burning in red flames, Arcturus asked with a cold and indifferent voice. In the center of the stone room, a huge red pentagram, similar to the flickering flames around it, appeared especially malevolent, especially with the black coffin in the center of the pentagram. Asterion pondered before responding with an equally cold voice. Yes, the conclusion I've reached is that they are released after our deaths. To prevent the chaos that would ensue every time a member of the House of Black died, our ancestor created the exorcism ritual, a ritual that used one's own blood to self-exorcise, burning away your soul, body, and mind. Arcturus looked at his great-grandson with appreciation in his eyes and answered, looking at the coffin that would be his final resting place. Asterion remained silent, knowing the final outcome of this conversation. I am dying, Asterion. My body no longer responds as it should, my mind is foggy, and my senses are slow. I would say I have less than a year until my whole body becomes a leprous and mangy vessel, decaying with a putrid smell. But before that, I will take my own life. Asterion felt as if someone were crushing his heart. The man he respected and loved was about to depart, and he could do nothing but witness it all as an irrelevant spectator. Gently touching Asterion's hair, Arcturus spoke with a relaxed tone, full of relief. I know what you are feeling right now, Asterion. I have lost loved ones, more than once, and this pain does not go away. Time does not dilute this bitterness and pain you feel at this moment, but you learn to live with it. I learned, and you will eventually learn too, because you are strong, because you are a black. My only regret is not seeing you getting married and having children. A house full of kids running around is a beautiful sight. Looking into Asterion's eyes, Arcturus smiled and tousled his hair with a sad yet relieved expression. After a long silence, Asterion looked at his great-grandfather and asked, Why were you telling me this? Because if I can't make it down here, you'll have to carry me and put my body in the coffin, Arcturus replied, looking at the coffin in the center of the pentagram. You're cruel. Showing a sad and bitter smile, Asterion looked at Arcturus with resentment. The man was asking to be killed. I know, but I know you'll do it, he finished as he walked out of the stone room, leaving Asterion with a grim and cold expression. Chapter 39, Chapter 37, Hogwarts Express, 1. Lying naked on the bed, Asterion pushed his hair back with his hand and looked at the naked woman beside him. She leaned her body against his, her breasts pressing against his chest. It was Bellatrix. After the conversation he had with his great-grandfather, Asterion only wanted one thing to unwind. The most effective way to unwind, proven by the human race, was sex. One thing led to another and it happened, although it wasn't his first time. A year ago, he couldn't resist Bellatrix's seduction and indulged in the forbidden fruit. Asterion wasn't to blame, he wasn't made of iron, and his body was burning with adolescent hormones at that moment. Everywhere he looked, he saw the vague shape of beautiful buttocks. Damn, he looked at an apple and saw a butt. If you're wondering if he and Bellatrix had a romantic relationship, the answer was no. What they did was purely about sex and mutual pleasure, no one mentioned feelings. Master, you were so rough and wild, Bella looked at Asterion, leaving many kisses on his chest and neck. Her beautiful green eyes showed a lazy and satisfied look from the carnal night where they indulged in pleasure and hedonism. Seeing him still in silence, she asked, Is something bothering you, Master? How can I ease your worries? Her face approached the curve of his neck, kissing and biting his neck while her hand gradually descended slowly to his lower region. Take control, Bella. Enjoying the kisses and bites on his neck, Asterion relaxed into the pillow and spoke, closing his eyes. Bellatrix's eyes lit up upon hearing his words. She straddled Asterion and captured his lips without hesitation, nibbling and sucking on the sweet lips she never tired of kissing. Soon after, in the room, the sound of heavy sighs and hot moans echoed, along with the constant clapping sounds. The week passed quickly, and September 1st arrived, the day Hogwarts began its school year. Asterion was already packed and had a new wand in its holster tied to his arm. 24 centimeters, elder wood, and the core were as unusual as possible a cursed spirit, to be precise, a core shaped like a cursed spirit made by himself. The core was nothing but pure negative magical energy, dark, sadistic, arrogant, and extremely fierce. When Asterion held the wand for the first time, a black glow bloomed from the tip, and a shockwave spread throughout the mansion, killing all the plant life in the mansion completely. His magic, once as untamed as a wild dragon, submitted to his wand without any hesitation. Now, he could cast spells without worrying about causing unnecessary destruction. The wand's appearance was entirely black, smooth as marble without any roughness. Intricately carved into the dark wood, a crow and a snake intertwined in a struggle. Honestly, he loved his customized wand, which was why he didn't go to Ollivander. The old British wand maker would refuse to use a wand so far outside his guidelines. Outside the mansion, Narcissa looked worriedly at Asterion, who held a suitcase in his hand. "Are you sure you don't want me to accompany you to the station?" "I'm not a child, sissy." Asterion rolled his eyes at her unfounded concern, but he didn't feel irritated by her excessive worry. After the divorce, she became especially attached to him, especially with her children not visiting her even once in 3 years. It could have been Lucius preventing the children from visiting, but it still hurt her. Suddenly, Narcissa hugged him and whispered many things in his ear, like sleeping early, not drinking too much, staying away especially from the Slytherin girls, and so on. She seemed more like a worried mother sending her child off to college. Pulling away from her, he looked at Bellatrix and said, "Don't forget my orders, Bella." "Yes, sir." Bella replied in a serious and loud tone, like a soldier saluting. "Send me a letter when needed." Looking at his great-grandfather, Asterion spoke with a softer tone than usual. Arcturus simply nodded and remained silent, looking at him with a calm and profound gaze. Saying goodbye to everyone once more, Asterion left, carrying his suitcase, and crossed the mansion's barrier. "He'll be fine, Narcissa. You don't need to worry so much," Arcturus said, comforting the woman as he noticed the concern on her face. "I know, but how can I not worry?" Narcissa murmured to herself with a sad look. Walking through King's Cross Station, Asterion easily located the secret entrance to platform 9/3/4. Before entering, he spotted a red-haired family wearing slightly worn clothes, hurrying along while engaged in conversation. The older red-haired woman didn't seem to stop talking, while the youngest girl, who appeared visibly frustrated, listened with a scowl on her face. Asterion almost instantly recognized the members of the Weasley family. In the original world they were the ones who benefited the most from the war, consequently producing the savior of the wizarding world and the smartest witch of the century. It could be said that the Weasley family was the Habsburg family of the magical world in terms of marriage. They lost some members in the war, yes, but gained other notable ones in the future. Shaking his head, Asterion ran towards the station pillar without fear, which, incidentally, was the entrance to platform 9/3/4. Asterion felt himself pass through a liquid barrier for a moment and found himself in another place. Many teenagers bustled back and forth while the Scarlet Express billowed steam across the platform. The place was chaotic and noisy, with cats darting around and owls hooting at each other. Asterion held onto his suitcase and stepped onto the crimson locomotive without a second thought, hating being in such a chaotic environment. Inside the train, Asterion saw numerous identical compartments, the only difference between them being the numbering beside each door. Walking for a moment and dodging some older students, Asterion chose an empty-looking compartment. To his surprise, when he opened the door, he found a young girl sitting by the window. "Is there a vacant spot, miss?" Narrowing his eyes, he inquired, looking at the young girl. "Yes, you can come in." Without looking at him, she replied casually, her voice lazy and slightly condescending. Asterion entered and placed his suitcase on the upholstered bench of the compartment. He sat down, glanced at the young girl, then looked away, taking a book from his suitcase and reading silently, not wanting to start a conversation. In the compartment, only the rustling of pages could be heard as both remained silent. Suddenly, breaking the silence, the door opened and a young girl with voluminous brown hair appeared. Her front teeth were slightly prominent, but the imperfection didn't detract from her charm. "May I come in?" she asked, her eyes wandering between the two inside the compartment with an uncertain look. "Come in, there are a few free seats." Since Asterion didn't bother to respond, the young girl spoke in his place. "Thank you." The girl with voluminous hair thanked and stored her own suitcase on the racks above the seats. Afterwards, she sat down next to the other young girl, and silence once again settled in the compartment. But it didn't last long, as the girl with brown hair introduced herself timidly. "I'm Hermione Granger." Whether it was Asterion or the other young girl, they both raised their heads and greeted her back. "Rose Potter." Asterion Black. As the two stated their names, Hermione widened her eyes and looked at them both with an incredibly shocked expression. Even Rose looked surprised at the young man. "I've read about you two," Hermione spoke excitedly without stopping, quoting some books about them. Asterion simply glanced at her and went back to reading his book. He didn't find the girl annoying, just busy reading at the moment. Seeing that Asterion ignored her, Hermione felt her smile stiffen. Seeing this, Rose, who didn't want to pay attention to the conversation, comforted young Hermione. "Don't worry about him, he's always like this." "It's okay, I'm used to it," Hermione spoke with a helpless smile and a sad look. Then, she heard the voice of the incredibly handsome young man. She noticed that his voice was cold and almost emotionless, but still very pleasant to listen to. "I ignored you because I'm busy at the moment, Miss Granger, nothing more. Don't take my silence as an insult." Hermione nodded, understanding, as she also didn't like to disturb her reading time. "By the way, cousin, I would appreciate it if you didn't call my book stupid." Raising his head and looking directly into Rose Potter's incredibly blue eyes, which seemed to have stars in them, combined with her white hair, and you knew her identity. The current bearer of the 6 eyes, Rose Lily Potter, the girl who lived. Chapter 40, Chapter 38, Hogwarts Express, 2. Cousin. Rose, who until a moment ago had been showing boredom, looked at the handsome young man in front of her with surprise. Raised only among the Dursleys, the sudden news caught her off guard. "What's so surprising? You probably have cousins in almost every noble house. That is, before your great-grandfather Henry Potter became pro-Muggle. After that, you were probably erased from every family tree." Asterion answered her doubts, while curiously eyeing the legendary 6 eyes. The revelation left Rose stunned. Hearing his words, she realized she probably had dozens of cousins she had never known. "Are we close cousins or distant ones?" Rose asked, looking at him with her bright blue eyes. Asterion tried to remember the chaotic black family tree before responding. "Our closest relationship is through your great-uncle Charles Potter, who married Doria Black." Rose nodded, silently absorbing all the information that had been dumped on her and its consequences. Hermione noticed the silent atmosphere and observed Asterion and Rose, trying to find some resemblance, but they were completely different from each other. One had white hair, the other black hair, one had beautiful blue eyes, the other dark red eyes. No matter how much she looked, they didn't look anything alike. Rose's thoughts were interrupted when the cabin door opened and a boy with red hair entered, wearing clothes slightly too big for him and sporting a shy expression. "Sorry, all the other cabins are full," he said, looking at everyone. His gaze paused for a moment on Rose, and he couldn't help but open his mouth, his cheeks gaining a shade similar to his hair. Clearly drawn by Rose's appearance, which was not surprising given that the girl was truly a goddess in the making. "Ron Weasley," he introduced himself, looking away, lacking the courage to stare at Rose for too long. "Rose Potter," Rose introduced herself indifferently. As for the boy's shy appearance, she wasn't surprised, she was very used to such situations. What was strange was the black-haired boy in front of her who didn't react to her appearance. "Hermione Granger," the girl introduced herself, not liking the abrupt entrance into the cabin, especially if there was a girl changing at the moment. Asterion remained silent and didn't introduce himself, which was considered rude, but he knew they couldn't be friends, so he didn't need to waste saliva. Not that he harbored any hatred or dislike for the boy, he simply knew they wouldn't get along from the start. Upon hearing Rose's name, Ron's eyes widened, and he looked eagerly at her, moving closer and sitting next to her, squeezing Hermione away regardless of the brown-haired girl's protest. He asked excitedly. "Do you have the scar?" Rose frowned and looked coldly at the boy. She didn't like his approach at all, nor did she like having pushed Hermione away from her. Despite this, she lifted her bangs and revealed the lightning-shaped scar on her forehead. Upon seeing the scar, Ron gasped and blurted out his question almost instinctively, unaware of the weight of his words. "Do you remember that night?" If Rose's initial impression of Ron was merely one of indifference, it had now transformed into a slight disgust. She couldn't comprehend how someone could broach such a delicate subject in such a manner. The almost cheerful tone with which he spoke about her parents' death only intensified the feeling of repulsion she was experiencing at the moment. "Mr. Weasley, it's not very polite to ask such a delicate question," Asterion intervened, closing the book firmly and interrupting the tense atmosphere that had settled in the cabin. Ron, finally waking up to the gravity of his question, tried to quickly apologize, but he was cut off by Rose. "No need to apologize. I'm not that fragile." Her voice sounded indifferent and cold as her eyes stared at Ron with an icy gaze. Ron swallowed hard under Rose's piercing gaze, as if a mountain rested on his shoulders, making even the act of moving seem like a daunting task. "Fascinating," Asterion murmured to himself, sensing the magical energy in the air and realizing the impressive control that Rose exerted over it. It was on a completely different level from his own. If he were to engage in a battle of attrition, he knew he would likely be defeated. He would expend more magical energy than Rose, who flawlessly controlled her magical energy at a subatomic level. An achievement considered insane. The tense atmosphere hung in the air, preventing anyone from initiating a conversation. Not that Asterion wanted one, but Rose didn't plan to let him remain silent. "So, Asterion, do I have any more relatives in your family?" she asked, ignoring the awkward atmosphere in the cabin. Narcissa Black, seemingly without crimes, Bellatrix Lestrange, wanted for numerous murders of Muggles, half-bloods, and purebloods, my uncle, Sirius Black, also a wanted criminal for blowing up an entire street of people, and my great-grandfather, Arcturus Black III, Asterion replied without hiding anything. He opened the book again and continued reading, unconcerned about what others might think of his family. Rose couldn't help but purse her lips upon hearing his indifferent voice, indifferent to the deeds of his relatives. She realized that the family of this cousin she had just met wasn't exactly one of the best, most of them were wanted criminals. Asterion Black. Ron, who had overheard everything, jumped from his seat and pointed at Asterion in shock. It was only now that he had recognized the most notable genius in the current British magical world. "Ron Weasley," Asterion rolled his eyes and replied in a nonchalant manner. Turning his attention back to the book, he continued, "I'd like to say it's a pleasure to meet you, but we both know that's not true." This made Ron's face turn red, not with shyness, but with anger. What teenagers most value at this age is self-esteem, something Ron didn't have much of in the first place, living in a crowded house with few financial resources. "It's a miracle from Merlin that your whole family isn't already in Azkaban," Ron retaliated as best as he could think of at the moment. Asterion merely raised an eyebrow slightly at the redhead's words. "Was that supposed to be an insult?" asked the Black Heir. "And isn't it?" Ron replied through gritted teeth. "If the whole family is included, your father is probably going to Azkaban, my dear cousin. Don't forget that Arthur Weasley is the grandson of Arcturus Black II," Asterion revealed information that left Ron staggering as he couldn't manage to utter a single word. Note, don't confuse Arcturus Black II and Arcturus Black III. Arcturus II is the uncle of Arcturus III, who is the great-grandfather of our protagonist. By the way, it's canon. I was also quite surprised by the revelation. You liar." He pointed at Asterion with a trembling finger, unable to finish the sentence properly. It wasn't just Ron who was shocked. Rose, who was listening to everything, opened her mouth and looked at the redhead. If Ron was Asterion's cousin, Ron was also her cousin. Looking at the trembling finger pointed at him, Asterion's red eyes gradually grew colder. "You better stop pointing at me, or else I'll rip your hand off." At the end of the sentence, Asterion released his malice without any scruples, unconcerned about the consequences of his actions. The entire train seemed to fall into an ice cavern, all the students regardless of age feeling chills running down their spine as a deep fear settled in the heart of each person on that train.
Thanks for listening.